Okay, good.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Sound check. It seems like it works. I think it works. Yep, it works. Okay.
You got a Nessa nod,
All right. And I'm guessing the online stream is alive and well. Do we have Director Lewis on? Yes, I mean, but she is virtual? Okay. Present and accounted for? Okay. We're going to go ahead and get started, everybody. Good morning. I'm Ozzy Gonzalez, president of the TriMet Board of Directors, and we are here today in the Public Safety Office in the Rose Quarter. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone here in person and online, and for today's November board retreat. Now, we've had recent retreats and work sessions, and like those, our time today is very valuable. We have a program that's been prepared for the board members that is going to help engage our brains today for some strategic discussions and some idea sharing. Now, I'm looking forward to these conversations myself, and I would like to first of all thank the board members for coming today, and including Director Lewis, who is here virtually. Maybe we'll get to see you. Certainly we'll hear from you later today, as well as all of those that have prepared presentations this morning. I know that we've got some information that's going to be shared with us as board members, and I want to thank all of the staff that's been involved in getting that work pulled together for us. Now, the TriMet is going to be presenting their annual Attitude and Awareness Survey data. And for our new board members, you'll get to see your first round of that. It's an annual survey that's conducted here throughout the region. And TriMet will be providing important safety and security progress. And so it's an apropos place to hear about that. And it's a topic top of mind I've heard many times from the board. And so those items will help us with what will follow, which is our opportunity to share our thoughts. We'll have some open discussion around these updates, and we'll have the opportunity to connect them, figure out how they intersect with Vision 2030, what I would say the broader goal for TriMet. Now, I'm thrilled to establish that today we get to do what I consider to be one of my favorite parts of the job, and our shared goal today will be to enhance the lives of those that we serve. And this is the commuters, the families, the businesses, everyone that relies on TriMet's system to connect them and to the opportunities and experiences that are within our region. And I'm excited about the discussions that are going to be unfolding here today. I expect that we'll be bringing some thoughts, some strategies forward, some insights that emerge. We're certainly going to be learning today. We're going to be hearing the latest and greatest from the agency. And on that note, without further delay, I'd like to hand it over to our General Manager, Sam DeSue.
Thank you, President Gonzalez, and good morning, board, staff, the public that's here as well. Thank you for the opportunity to share a few thoughts with you before we get into the presentations that we've prepared for you today. As always, I also appreciate these retreats and the thoughtful discussions that we're going to have. And the result of that is inspired action that we'll take. So over these last couple of months, we've all been busy with retreats and strategy sessions. And it's really been a source of inspiration and innovation for TriMet. You know, listen to your comments and solicit the feedbacks. And they've provided us with a very unique opportunity to reflect on our achievements, really learn from our challenges, and really chart the course of our future. So very excited about that, and thank you for your dedication and the insightful guidance that you've provided us. And I really believe that it's really setting us up to be on the right path as we move forward. Today we're going to delve into the heart of what make TriMet not just a transit agency, but a vital thread in the fabric of our community. And it's the people we serve. We're gonna talk a little bit about that. Earlier this year, we conducted an annual attitude and awareness survey, and this information that we've gathered has provided us with some invaluable insights into the minds of our riders and also our non-riders. While J.C. Vanetta, who's here this morning, he's going to get into the specifics of the survey, I want to give you just a short, quick, brief overview and an introduction of the retreat this morning. So as we continue to move forward to meet our goals of Vision 2030 and the many benchmarks along the way, we're going to use this attitude and awareness survey data as one of our guide rails. The insight offered through the data will be a very useful snapshot and gauges the temperature of a cross-sectional of TriMet riders and also non-riders of TriMet alike. So a couple of few insights here. So I'll start with ridership. Like the feedback from the past years, TriMet isn't just a means to get from point A to point B. We are a facilitator of experiences. If you think about this, we are a passport to recreation. We're an avenue to the airport, and we are a lifeline to everyday needs. And the data that we're going to showcase this morning is going to show that our ridership is diverse as the city that we serve, and also it continues to extend well beyond a traditional commuting to a multifaceted, community-driven travel. So regarding satisfaction and changes and challenges, we celebrate the fact that 67% of our riders are satisfied, but we also acknowledge that there's much more work to be done. Understanding that variation differences between our rider experience and then those of our non-riders, it's really pivotal. So we're going to talk about that. And the data really reminds us that our services are appreciated, but not universal, understood, or embraced. So we must bridge that gap and really to make TriMet the kind of first choice for everyone. Which brings me to the safety and reliability. I'm looking at you, Andrew, over here. You know, safety as expected remains paramount as we move forward. And the survey really reflects a mixed sentiment, emphasizing our need to not only maintain, but to enhance security measures, especially on MAX. That's there. And we've heard this just not from our riders and the community, but all of our partners, you know, our business partners, our regional partners, we've heard this. Just yesterday, I want to just call out that myself and staff, we met with Portland City Commissioner Dan Ryan yesterday in a very good meeting. So he came to the meeting and he said that he and the entire city council stressed the importance, which they are very supportive of any and all security measures that we will put in place to ensure transit is there for all who need it. So it was really good to have that meeting with him in my office, and I didn't go to City Hall. He actually came to TriMet to talk to us, and the city is really ready to partner. And we're hearing that from all over. We were in Beaverton last month. We're talking to Clackamas. I was at a retirement ceremony with Director Frisbee, and I talked to Commissioner Salvis from Clackamas County about safety and security. But I appreciate the support of the city and all of our partners, you know, as we have worked hard to move the needle on these issues. We are leading as a convener to address safety and security issues in our region. So finally, I just want to make sure I give you a quick look at the agenda. I think you all should either have it on your systems, but JC is going to lead us through this presentation on our 2023 Attitude and Awareness Survey. It's going to provide all of you a snapshot of how the region and our riders perceive TriMet. He also will cover how we are utilizing the key findings from the Attitude and Awareness Survey to help guide our actions and our Vision 2030 plan. And then we're going to use this data to really help drive direction. So after that, we'll have a quick break, and then we will move on to the safety and security progress presentation from our Chief Operating Officer, Bonnie Todd, also our Executive Director of Safety and Security, Andrew Wilson, and also Dan Blair, who is our interim Executive Director of Maintenance Operations. This presentation will lead to a board discussion the topic of this retreat, reviewing our potential safety and security concepts and really identifying other potential areas to explore. So I'm really excited to hear from you and look forward to what's going to come out of this work session here. And with that, I want to just pause for a moment and kind of check in to see President Gonzalez and the board if there's any questions before we dive in, or any comments that you or the board would like to share.
Fellow board members, any questions or comments before we proceed? And I'm trusting that if Director Lewis were to raise her hand, we have a way to know. Thank you. Nothing from Director Lewis. Thank you. I hear no questions or comments. I'm excited to hear what you have to share.
All right. So before we thank you for that, and as we move right along here, I want to welcome JC, who's going to be leading a presentation on public perception of TriMet. So JC, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam. Sam touched on some key points which I think are going to be incredibly important for today's discussion. You should know our Attitude and Awareness Survey is our key barometer of how our community perceives us and how our riders view TriMet and this important service that we provide. Today, we have two presenters, Kate Gunby and Hasini Munasinghe. They're here from our research firm PRR, and we'll go over this year's results. So Kate and Hasini, you can take it from here.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here today. And thank you so much for the fantastic introduction and sort of kind of pinpointing how these findings are fitting into the broader agenda today and all of the work you're doing. My name is Dr. Hansini Munasinghe, and I'm a senior research associate at PRR, and I'm joined by Dr. Kate Gunby, who is the director of research at PRR, as well as Dr. Mike Morris, who's another research associate at PRR, who's also supporting this work. Today, we will be presenting some of the key findings from the 2023 Attitude and Awareness Survey. I will walk us through sort of what we did, how we did it, and some of the main things we're hearing from people in regards to kind of their satisfaction with services overall. And I will hand it over to Dr. Kate Gunby, who will talk us through kind of most specific experiences that riders are having, as well as some around the topic of safety there as well, which I know is kind of the focus today. So next slide, please. So we conducted this online survey between March and April of 2023. During this time, there were no major events in the market that we think would affect the data in any way. To invite people to take the survey, we mailed 100,000 postcards to randomly selected addresses in the TriMet service area. To incentivize participation, we conducted a drawing for a chance to win one of 25 $100 gift cards for people who completed the survey. The survey was also available in 6 languages that you can see here: English, Simplified, Chinese, Korean, Russian, Spanish, and Vietnamese. Overall, we received 1,696 valid survey responses. We are very happy with this kind of the amount of data we were able to collect, it is proportional to the demographic distribution of respondents. We had a proportional age and gender distribution, and 16% of respondents reported that they have a disability. We also heard from people with a wide range of household incomes. I also want to point out that the survey and the findings we're sharing today are limited to people who live in the TriMet service area and to people who reported that they have knowledge of TriMet services. Most respondents in our sample, 83%, ride TriMet, even if infrequently. Next slide, please. Yeah. To kind of lay the foundation for what we're sharing today, we want to start by talking a little bit about public mood. And this is a question that a lot of cities and other agencies are using around the country. So we ask people, do you feel that things in the Portland metropolitan area are generally going in the right direction, or do you feel things have gotten off on the wrong track? And here, really quickly, I'll point out that for most of our slides, you'll see a green box at the bottom that shows you the exact wording of the survey question we used. And here we can see that question asked over time. And in the most recent data collection, we saw that the belief that things in the Portland metro area are going in the right direction has continued to decrease. And at this time, it's difficult to say if this is part of a broader trend. And this is something we definitely want to keep an eye on as we continue collecting data on these sorts of questions. And something else I want to point out is that we've done some additional analysis, and I want to share that this is not something that is unique to Portland. A lot of cities around the country are seeing who are using this specific question or something similar to that are seeing kind of a change in attitudes or a sort of a negative trend in attitudes. So this is definitely not something that's unique to Portland. And as you can see, we've had a survey gap during those early years of COVID. And that's also making it difficult to kind of know if this is a sudden change or a part of a trend. And again, definitely something to keep an eye on as we move forward.
Hasini, a quick question. What is the margin
Yes.
of error?
That's a great question. Margin of error, I believe, is 2%, so plus or minus 2% for this survey.
Thank you.
Right. Any other questions before we go into the key findings? All right, next slide, please.
We do have another question.
All right, yes.
Quick question. So am I understanding correctly that in previous years we've done the same exact sort of question language with the same demographics, 100,000 folks? I mean, all the way down from 2013?
That's a great question. There have been some changes actually, if you could go to the slide that has the years, I can kind of talk through some of the changes.
Okay.
So there have been some changes to the survey, the way the survey is administered. So the question, as I understand, has stayed pretty consistent. However, the sample may have had some changes. In the early years of the survey, I believe it was done as a phone survey only, and they switched to Lonnie, maybe you remember the year exactly, but I know it switched from being a phone survey to an online survey, which, is just part of parcel of how surveys are done, but it can change a little bit of the people you hear from. The additional change that was done last year is we've increased the number of postcards somewhat, and we've also gone from previously it was a guaranteed dollar amount given to everyone who completed the survey. And we switched from that to a higher dollar amount, but with a chance to win from a drawing, which we find kind of incentivizes people more. So we've gone in that direction. So there have been some small changes in the survey administration that could potentially shape the sample, but the question, as I understand, has stayed consistent. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, Director Wei.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I know we're peppering you with questions right in the ongoing, but I just have I just want to understand the sample size. So at the bottom, it's 1,600 or about 1,700 folks. So that's the total amount of TriMet frequent writers that have taken this survey, right?
That is the total number of
It's the
just
total number of
people who
all people who responded to the survey.
Got it. Okay. Okay, thank you. And so, but that, I just want to point out that that is a very small amount of folks compared to our total ridership level. Okay, right, because obviously our ridership is a lot larger. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, you
Director
have a
Frisbee.
bunch of survey nerds. And actually, Director Edwards, I think you were ahead of me if you want to go first.
Thank you. I guess my question is kind of along the same lines. This was a question not asking about TriMet. This was asking about the mood of people in regards to what they thought the city looked like and the city's environment. It had nothing to do with public transit. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. And this is a very general question. So it's hard for us to know really what is top of mind for people as they are answering this, because again, it's just asking about your general feeling about the Portland metropolitan area. So it could be various things that are top of mind for different people when they answer this question. And I just want to clarify the response to the previous question as well. Yeah, with each question, you'll see at the bottom here the number of responses for that question that we're presenting. And you'll see it vary a little bit just with the number of people who stayed for the whole survey, as well as some survey logic, where some people answered the question, some questions, but not others in the survey.
And Director Edwards, I would add this question is very, very important for us because it helps put into context how their responses for our other questions, and it kind of gives you a little bit of a feel for what people are thinking and feeling. So it definitely influences.
Well, especially if 64% of them think that the city is going in the wrong direction. They're already there, and now we're trying to move them back to a place where they think TriMet is going in the right direction.
Well, and we do have slides on how people perceive TriMet too, so that's to come.
Thank you.
Director Frisbee?
So thank you. First of all, I wanted to welcome Director Kellogg. We're in the middle of our Attitude and Awareness Survey presentation, where we are about to hear more of the key findings from the survey. We're just getting the lay of the land now for the survey itself. And in light of that, I believe there's a little bit of questions coming around methodology, and if we could just understand where how the sample size might set in context with previous surveys.
Yeah.
And there's a specific question about process.
And I would just note, I do have an answer for that. Just over 800 responded to the first survey we conducted after the gap, and then up to 1,200 last year, and up to almost 1,790 this year. So we are constantly growing, and that has to do with us and the methodology, or excuse me, the pieces that were going out to the public. Before, it was just calling people on their phones, and no one picks up a phone these days. They say, text me instead. So we actually we changed the way that we put out the survey, and we have gotten even more responses. So we're going in the right direction.
And it sounds like it. And with the sample population, when you send out the 100,000 mailers, could you just speak a little bit about how you identify that pool of potential recipients?
And Hasini, do you want to go speak to that?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So we identified 100,000 randomly selected addresses that are in the TriMet service area. So we use like a geolocation to identify all of the addresses that fall within a certain boundary of the TriMet service area and select a sample of that. We actually did 2 rounds of postcards because we were trying to gauge what the response rate was going to be. So we sent out 50,000 postcards first, saw the response to that, and sent out an additional 50,000 postcards, and we saw the numbers go up to a level that we were satisfied with. And yeah, and we also used some data from the US Census to identify areas that we should be kind of sampling from, paying attention to income, racial composition, things like that.
And I would note, this is a statistically valid survey.
Thank you.
Just to make sure.
Thank you. And so I'll remind the board we will have opportunities for discussion and thoughts, and I'll encourage us to be able to receive some of the findings, and then we can start looking at the context clearly. We're not just looking at findings. We also want to know how we arrive at them. So thank you.
That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you for all the great questions so far. I think we can move to key findings. Yes. So the first key finding here that we want to point out, I think this is something we talked about at the beginning in the introduction to the presentation. We asked riders which of the following activities for which of the following activities do you ride TriMet? And we kind of found that people use it for a variety of non-commute purposes and activities. Recreation was actually the most common at 65%, followed by going to the airport, shopping, work, etc. And this aligns with a shift away from primarily commute-focused service towards TriMet becoming the preferred choice for a variety of travel needs. Next slide, please. While 67% of respondents report using public transit, driving is the most common transportation type used. So here you can see almost 80% say they drive themselves, and another 34% say they someone drives them. So driving continues to be kind of the primary mode of transportation for a lot of folks. Next slide, please. And among current riders, 74% of approve of the job TriMet is doing. So in this chart and the ones that follow, the chart. Sorry, in this slide and the slides that follow, the chart on the bottom of the page here shows the percentage of all respondents. But we think really what the highlight here is what people who are currently riding TriMet have to say. So in a lot of the slides, you'll see the overall finding in the chart, and we'll call out kind of the findings among riders. So here you can see riders' approval rate is higher than everyone combined. So among all respondents, 68% say that they approve of the job TriMet is doing. Next slide, please. And then we asked some more specific questions about services. So we asked if they approve of the existing TriMet bus system and the Max Light Rail system. And here too, we are seeing really high approval rates among current riders. 74% approve of the bus and 81% approve of Max. And this is kind of consistent with findings for the overall population as well. Next slide, please. And here we are seeing those questions asked over time. And we are seeing that consistent with prior years, most respondents approve of the transit systems and the job TriMet is doing. Max Light Rail remains the most popular service. As you can see, it's just a little bit higher than the approval rate for bus and TriMet overall. However, it's a pretty high approval rating across all the services. Next slide, please. Among riders, 67% are satisfied with their experience on TriMet, with 21% saying that they are very satisfied with the experience on TriMet. Next slide, please. And here we are seeing that same question again over time. So even though satisfaction with TriMet experience has decreased somewhat over time, we're still seeing that about 2 of 3 riders say that they're satisfied with their overall experience. Again, this is something that we probably want to keep an eye on as we're collecting more data in upcoming years, but still seeing a pretty high overall satisfaction among riders. Next question, next slide, please. We also asked the question about Net Promoter Score. So this is a question that's commonly used in marketing analytics, where you ask respondents if they would recommend the service to a friend or family member. And here we saw that 40% of respondents who ride at least several times a week would enthusiastically recommend TriMet to a friend or family member. So among frequent and regular riders, the Net Promoter Score was 10. Next slide, please. And kind of getting more into different aspects of the service, most current riders say that they get good value for their fare, with 1 in 3 saying they get excellent value. And we asked a follow-up question whether it's easy or difficult to pay fares, and 83% say that paying fares is somewhat or very easy. Next slide, please. And we also asked respondents a question about a kind of service reliability. This is how reliable is the service on Max and how reliable is it on buses. And here again, you can see that trend over time. 75% believe that Max is reliable, 71% believe that the bus service is reliable. And here too, we are seeing that current riders just are rated just a little bit more positively than people who don't ride. Next slide, please. Riders find it easy to plan trips and track vehicle arrival times. When we asked about these 3 questions, again, 82% of riders said that they find it somewhat easy or very easy to plan their trips and know the arrival times. We asked a follow-up question, kind of what apps or tools they use to plan their trips. And TriMet Trip Planner was actually the most popular, with 60% saying that they use it, followed by Google Maps, which 45% of the people are using to plan their trips. Next slide, please. And from here, I will hand it over to Dr. Kate Gunby to talk a little bit more about the specific experiences of riders.
Thanks, Anthony. So for this, we asked how often are people currently working from home and which of the options have their employer offered? And what we found is that it was pretty even thirds. About a third are working from home every day, a third are commuting every day, and another third do a mix of both remote and in-person work. So again, this ties into the trend of seeing it be less about a regular commute every day using TriMet, and more people having either varied commutes or work trips that they're using TriMet for, in addition to that recreation, airport trips, shopping, things like that. We also found that the day of the week that people ride the most really varies. There is generally higher ridership Tuesday through Friday, and in the afternoon, specifically from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. But here again, you see 61% of our rider respondents said that it varies which days of the week they use TriMet, and really quite a variety of times when people are traveling throughout the day. But again, with that peak in the afternoon between 3 and 6 p.m. We also asked people why they ride TriMet, and we really found that avoiding negative things were the top motivators. So most of our current riders said that they ride TriMet to avoid parking, to avoid downtown driving, and to avoid traffic. There were also some benefits. So environmental consciousness and convenience were the fourth and fifth most common reasons why people ride TriMet. And then when choosing how to travel around town, we asked, what are you prioritizing? What are the top 3 things that are important to you as you think about how you travel? The top one, the topic of the day, is safety. 47% chose safety. And then again, we see avoiding parking and avoiding traffic as big motivators. Convenience in the environment, again, coming in 4th and 5th place. Another thing that we kind of keyed into here is that we know that COVID-19 really was affecting a lot of people's willingness to ride in recent years. And we were happy to see that in 2013, it was not as big of a factor for most people. So 70% of people said there was no change in their ridership due to COVID-19. 15% said they were less willing to ride, but that was also balanced with 13% who said that they were more willing to ride. And then getting into the big topic, safety and security. So overall, we found that respondents feel safer on buses than on Macs. And here again, you can see that there's a big difference between what current riders tell us about how safe they feel and what non-riders tell us about how safe they feel. So 60% of current riders said that they feel safe on buses, and 49% of Macs riders said that they feel safe. And then it was 18% for non-riders among both services. And overall, another note here is that 48% of all respondents said that they have safety concerns that have prevented them from taking Max trains at some point. So we wanted to understand a little bit more about what it was that felt so unsafe. And across the board, it was mostly other riders' behavior. Nearly 8 in 10 riders said that other riders' behavior was the main reason they felt unsafe while riding TriMet. Digging in, it also gets a little bit nuanced. So we see that a solid 44% said that a lack of transit police is a concern, followed by, I'm going to jump down, there's a lack of unarmed security, lack of non-security TriMet staff, or a lack of fare enforcement staff. Around a third of people listed those concerns. At the same time, jumping further down in the page, you can see 11% of respondents said that they feel unsafe with the presence of transit police, and 8% feel unsafe with the presence of fare enforcement. So there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. That's easy here. It's not simply having more transit police or more fare enforcement for everyone. There's really different feelings of safety, largely based, our understanding is on demographics and also different experiences people have had with transit police and fare enforcement in the past. We also see that time of day and part of town are big reasons why people might feel unsafe, with just under 40% of respondents listing those as reasons they felt unsafe while riding TriMet. So then we wanted to look a little bit to the future and see what are people thinking about kind of the future of their ridership. We asked, in the next 6 months, do you expect to ride TriMet? And we found that 72% of the respondents said that they do intend to ride as much or more than they currently do, with 12% riding more than they do now. This overall is a pretty solid number. We see that only 5% of our respondents said that they're planning to ride less than they do now. And again, this is out of everybody who answered the question. So it's not just riders, it's really anyone who answered. So then we wanted to dig into the people who said that they plan to ride less or ride not at all. And again, we found that safety concerns were the top reason. 78% cited safety concerns. 56% said that they're going to use other modes instead. And then with about a third reporting service concerns and then cleanliness concerns lingering. And I think it's notable here that we didn't hear much from current riders about cleanliness concerns. We know that used to be a hot topic, and it really seems like it's kind of faded away, but it may still be looming large for some people who are not riding or reluctant to ride TriMet. And then finally, at the end of the survey, we asked an open-ended question, just wondering what could TriMet do to get you to ride more often? And really what we heard here is, again, safety and service were top of mind. So about 22% of respondents wrote in that safety improvements would get them to ride more. And these included comments around staffing on vehicles, removing problem riders from vehicles, and fare enforcement. And then some other top things that came up were increased service frequency, shorter rides or more direct routes, lower or no fares, onboard police or security, decreased or free fares, a wider service area, greater fare enforcement, and then at the bottom of the list, we have cleaner vehicles or stops. One other thing I want to note, so the question was what could get you to ride more often, and 6% of our respondents instead said, everything's great, we're really satisfied with the service, we ride frequently, there's really nothing you can do better to get us to ride more often. So I think while there's certainly room for improvement in a lot of areas, it's also reassuring to know that there's a solid portion of riders who are really happy with that level of service and thrilled with the work that TriMet's doing. And with that, we just want to say thank you and open it up to questions.
And I would just note that last slide is something that we are taking to heart. And my next presentation will be how all of those things and the themes that we have heard in the key findings are dovetailing with what we're working on for Vision 2030. But first, we can have any questions for this presentation.
All right. Thank you very much for that presentation. I already see our board members raising their hands, and I'm just going to go in the order of appearance. I'll do my best. Director Frisbee.
Thank you, President Gonzalez. And I will preface this with your answer might be let's just talk later, because I have a lot of questions. And having done a lot of public opinion research on similar issues, I might be digging too far down in the details. So feel free to tell me. We can talk about it later. Thank you so much for your presentation and your work. Really appreciate it, and really appreciate coming today to check in with us. My first question is, can you share the crosstabs?
Yeah, I don't think that's an issue at all.
Awesome. And when you did the looking at it, I'm thinking in particular for the 83% of riders who responded, does their demographic information align with our ridership population in general?
I believe so. Hanson, do you want to speak to that one?
Sorry, and I don't know if I'm asking you or
No.
if I'm asking them, so I'm awkwardly in between.
They have the info.
No problem. Yeah, we can share the top line and kind of the cost tabs, the overall findings. I think one of the challenges we ran into with this survey, and this is actually something I didn't talk about at the beginning, but in previous years there had been some survey weighting to sort of try to match the population of the area. But one of the challenge, we have not done that for this round of the survey, and one of the reasons was because we don't have good data on the full ridership population to know what the demographic breakdown of riders actually looks like. So we don't want to try to match it to the city or match it to county level data, because the people who ride the bus could look, for various different reasons, look different from the overall population of that area. So to answer your question, we do have the demographic breakdown of everyone in our sample. We collected a lot of demographic background information from them. But yeah, it's difficult to say how well it matches. Kate, I don't know if there's anything here you'd add about. We didn't notice any kind of stark differences from kind of population numbers.
Thank you. I'm surprised we don't have demographic information on our ridership, but
And we don't. And usually we use this type of demographic information to help inform us because we actually gather that. We don't gather a lot of demographic information on other surveys.
all right. Thank you.
But it's a good point.
Now I have questions that you may tell me that are digging in. On the Net Promoter Score question, was there an opportunity to give a reason for why they would or would not encourage other folks to use it? Was there any open-ended component of that? My guess
We
is
did
no,
not
but I
ask
thought
that
it-
question. Yeah.
Awesome. On the paying fares question, the folks you asked, like, is it easy for you to pay the fare? Was that intended to be about the actual logistics of paying the fare, or was it intended to be about budget?
My understanding is that it was about the logistics of it, kind of the system.
Okay. And do we have a feeling that that's how most respondents understood it?
I don't think we know for sure. The question's at the bottom of this page, and it's simply how easy or difficult is it for you to pay your fare? It's a question that's been used in the past, but I think that's a great point that we could split that out to look into the mechanics of paying versus the cost.
And we introduced a little bit of background. We introduced that question before we converted over to the HOP system so that we could see
Yeah.
the ease of use when we switched from paying with cash to the HOP system. So we've asked that question every year after that just to understand.
Yeah. And I'm just wondering if
Yeah.
it's worth,
Clarifying.
updating that.
Yeah, we can definitely make a note for that for next time. And something else that might kind of shape how people are answering is this question appeared as a series of questions about how easy is it to plan your trip, how easy is it to pay. So I think it was part of like a series of logistical questions, which might signal how people were thinking. But again, we don't know exactly, and it might be worth it to clarify.
Yeah. Thank you. On the safety questions, I first want to, I think all of this is really helpful and instructive for all of us, and I appreciate the way that this was put together. And I am wondering, and I'm guessing we don't know, but are most of the folks who identified as non-riders, are they former riders or are they non-riders, right? Like, I'm trying to understand how many of them are folks who have chosen not to ride because of experiences they have had, or who are just relying on what they hear in the world about how terrifying things are. Do we have a good feel? Was that any information? we have?
Hansini, are you able to, or Kate?
You might just be projecting, which is the antithesis of your job, so I'm sorry.
No, that is actually a challenge that we are facing with a lot of, we're doing this sort of research for a lot of different transit agencies. And this is a question that comes up all the time when people have these negative safety perceptions. How much of that is really, anchored in experiences they've had versus, maybe things they've seen in the media. To answer your question, we don't know whether people were riders before who've changed their behavior. We don't know that. We do know that these are folks, because of the way the survey was set up, these are folks who had awareness about TriMet, so they at least know the names of services and things like that to answer the questions. But yeah, that's a really tricky issue to distinguish between perceptions of safety, and it's really hard for us as researchers to say, well, that perception is not rooted in reality versus somebody else's is. So it gets very challenging. But yeah, this is definitely something we're thinking about as well.
Yeah.
I would just note this is a long survey. On the phone, it's 45 minutes.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So that's why we have switched
Oh,
to
yeah.
online. So just
Sure.
trust me.
Oof. Okay. I'm impressed that we got 1,700 people to respond in that case.
Us too.
All right. I think I will just summarize quickly and say, I mean, I think all of us are really interested in this, and I hope that we are taking this moment to look at how we can help current riders continue to feel safe and comfortable on the system. I hope we are also, I think I am struggling as a board member with how to balance, when you see 11% of folks who feel more unsafe because of the presence of transit police, how do we make sure as we do things to help people feel more comfortable and more secure, how we also keep in mind the safety of people who have specific and real reasons to feel threatened by certain types of security presence. And so I hope that we can think about all of these feelings and how we balance all of it. And if we're going to reach 120 million rides, we can't lose a rider, and we need a big portion of the folks who aren't. So just our work is cut out for us.
Well said, Director Frisbee. Director Wade.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this survey. I do have a few questions. Can you go back to the slide 22? This one. Thank you. So I also feel the same way. I feel like this, just how the perception of safety and what is our response to it, I think it looks varied from here. For the folks who are doing the survey, did you go and specify, for example, what is the difference between transit police versus, fair enforcement staff? Like, was it clear when the public was taking this survey what the differences are and what the roles were with those?
We did not provide any additional information like that. The way they saw the question is pretty similar to how you're seeing it on the slide right now, except the question was at the top and these answer options were provided to them. So that's a good question. We don't know kind of how, if people know the differences and how those apply to TriMet.
Got it. I just want to raise that point because I know that we have more and more, safety officers, unarmed presence in our system, which is great, as well as, ambassadors, right, who go out and kind of try to provide more customer service to the community. So I think regardless of what the uniform is, I think it is important to educating the public about, these are all the different roles, right, that we have employed when it comes to providing that safe experience. And then so also for the other riders' behavior, did we specify, was there a specification of like what those behaviors are, or is it just like a blanket, I'm concerned, about riders' behavior in general?
Again, for this question, it just was listed as other riders' behaviors just as an option of the things that might make you feel unsafe. I don't want to put Mike, you on the spot, but I don't know if there's, we did a lot of digging into some of the qualitative responses, which is the work that Mike led. If there's any findings from there that might speak to sort of how people were thinking about these experiences, if there's anything specific that comes out, Mike.
Yeah, I think we heard a wide range of responses there. There were certainly some things around drug use. There were some things around just sort of general antisocial behavior, people saying things that made people uncomfortable, people, acting in ways that made people uncomfortable. I'm not sure that we pulled out specific themes within that, but I think there was certainly a wide range of both what you would expect, as well as some colorful responses to what people thought of other riders, as you could probably imagine. So.
Thank you. I mean, I think moving forward, I'm kind of also struggling as a board member to make sense of, and I know we're going to talk a little bit more detail, of just trying to make sense, right, of some of these responses, because 77% riders' behavior, that jumps out at me, but without knowing exactly, right, are those incidences where folks are carrying weapons on the trains, or are those instances where, people are just yelling and swearing. That, for me, I would like a better breakdown of what exactly are those types of behaviors. And then also, I mean, I think if we try to break that down a little bit more, I think then our response, right, to how do we respond to that? Is it transit police because of the knife wielding example, for example, as a very extreme one? Or do we call up customer service because someone is just being unruly or they're intoxicated? So for me as a board member, that would be important data points to see and know moving forward. Because right now it's just, it can be all over the place in terms of how are we identifying as other riders' behavior, and again, what is our proper response to it in terms of our resources?
And I would just note on that point that what we see is a lot of the behavior, while there is instances of smoking fentanyl or what have you, a lot of the what we see is uncivil behavior. While it might not be illegal, where we can't hold them to the law or even some of our code, we still try to intervene at some point with some of our people on staff. So that's very difficult. I would also note that Andrew made mention of us using a number to call our security office and to report that. And we're going to be rolling out a much larger campaign because everyone has kind of a stake in the game. And so really having that type of help to report it and we can respond to it, that's going to be huge for us.
Thank you. Sorry, and then one final question. On the slide where it says recreation was the kind of the bar chart that was, you know, one of the main reasons why folks were taking TriMet. I forget the number of the slide. Yeah, it was in the earlier. There we go. That one.
6.
So over half of these respondents said recreation was the reason. Is there more specification of what kind of recreation? For example, Blazers game versus concerts versus.
That's what you see a lot is Blazers game, Timbers game, because people want to avoid parking and the fees associated with parking. So. But that's also an opportunity for us to do our best, right? So that they come to a Blazers game, our service is spot on, trains are clean, safety's there, and we have a return customer. So it's really looking at that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Wade. Dr. Lewis, we see you have a question.
Excuse me, unmute myself. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Oh, okay. Thank you. First, I would like to thank all of those who brought the survey together. I know it's an enormous amount of work, and I've done research myself, so thank you for the time, energy. And it's true, a lot of the questions that bring together the one question that you do have and the length of time, I'm surprised that it wasn't at least 2 hours and going through a survey, especially with language barriers. It can take a lot of time, and it's an enormous project. So thank you, thank you. I'd like to share with our board members that this information similar for 2022 was what the Reimagining Committee looked at and used. And we did have several conversations over, I think, a 6-month period on why our community members have fear of police and riding. And the answer is complex. There's no simple one reason. A lot of times members of the community have issues with our transit police, but it's a fear or a issue with police in general. And so that translates into TriMet. If they're going to a Blazer game and there's security, there is security issues going into Fred Meyer's, not picking on Fred Meyer's, and they have door security. So security, period, anything that represents authority is an issue. It just translates. And that was one of the takeaways I received. But we did have members of the Reimagining Committee who were representative of nonprofits bring those concerns. And so we did hear really good details of why. For us to kind of assume would mean actually sitting down one-to-one with members of our community to hear their stories. That's where I think Director Frisbee was going into some of the weeds. That's where we're would hear the actual stories of that attaches a human response to the survey. The survey and research and survey is a collective, but to get into the weeds, we do have to have that one-to-one relationship with our community, especially in the Black community and the Hispanic community, if we want to dive deep into some of the, fair enforcement, presence of transit police, and hear those stories. The second part of my thought process this morning is, so we had 2022's survey. And so I guess this is a question for VP Vanetta. What have we done? And I did not see this in the slides. Well, it wouldn't be because this is our new survey. But what has happened from 22 slides, which had similar, and that information is available to us as directors. And this year, I mean, what happened? Because every year we collect data and survey. But what I'd like to know, what did we do to move the needle up or down, and what was the results as an organ or as TriMet to make a difference? Because we're going to get new data next year, but what are we doing, or what did we do to implement any changes or address any of our survey results from 22 to 23?
That is a very good question, Director Lewis. And I would say I would probably have to put together a list of all those things. It is a multitude of different things, whether it's implementing new service with Forward Together, the increase in our safety and security efforts, our educational efforts around low-income fare and getting people to understand how to use the system even more. So there are a number of efforts that we have put into motion, and I would say that you're probably seeing some of those things. But going back to Director Edwards' piece around the general view of our region, I think that plays a heavy hand on how people perceive not just TriMet but for riders, but also non-riders as well. So I would have to put together a list for you to answer that question. But there have been a number of things that we have done to, if not maintain, if not grow, but maintain where we're at. And I think that's incredibly important.
I think that would be the bridge piece that would help us. And then I think it was slide 1 that Director Edwards had noted. And I'm curious to know if this information or this slide was provided to the governor's task force on downtown or to the mayor, or when I think it was mentioned, General Manager DeSue mentioned that they met with City Hall. Was this information provided? Because it is an overall projection of what's happening in Portland. Do we share the information?
We do share the information, and I would say that the task force and the downtown community are working with even more granular and more current data. Forgive me, this data is coming to you from earlier this year. We would have brought it to you sooner, but it's a little bit hard to get on your schedule since you have a busy board schedule. And we are about to go early next spring out again. So taking all these comments down, we will absolutely wrap it into our next report back to you. But yes, we do share all that information. And again, they're using much more current data with all of the surveys that they have done to affect a difference.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Lewis. And I see your hand raised, Director Frisbee. I have a quick question for our consultants on this, and then I'll pass it over to you. Of the almost 1,700 responses, how many of the responses were submitted out in non-English formats?
That's a great question. I don't know if I have the data right in front of me at this moment, but I do recall that it was a smaller number than we would have liked. And this is definitely something we're thinking about as we're kind of doing the survey in the future. The survey recruitment material was in all languages, but we were wondering if there were some gaps of how people were hearing about the survey or kind of being drawn into the survey. Another thing I can note too is that there may be folks who use other languages other than English in their household, but still chose to respond to the survey in English. So that's something to take into account as well. And we are happy to share those numbers after the meeting.
That'd be a useful data point. Thank you. And I will remind the board we do have an hour set aside for general discussion about this presentation and a few others that we are going to be having. And I appreciate all of the interest in this, but I wanted to just point that out. We are very much interested in this, but I know that the agency has a few more things to share. With that, if there's more questions regarding this particular survey study, I'd love to have them brought now so that we can move to the next presentation.
I'll be so fast. I will just follow up on Director Lewis's comments. And having done similar work in the past, one of the challenges about tracking changes in people's opinions of any issue is that it's not just what TriMet has done. And in fact, sometimes that's actually the least impactful, even if we're talking about people's opinions of TriMet. External events that we have had little to nothing to do with often have a bigger impact on people's opinions of TriMet than the changes that we can make. So I think that's important for us to keep in mind. We exist in community with lots of different inputs. And then, JC, I will just acknowledge that they are expensive, but what I am hearing is lots of interest in digging down into sort of more qualitative discussion, which to me says focus groups.
Yeah.
And that might be worth further discussion on
Absolutely.
some of these key issues.
No, absolutely. And I think that what we want to do is take this data and really dig into it and really look into also what we need for Vision 2030. One of the things I always keep bringing up, we believe that on-time performance is one of those measures that we should hold ourselves accountable. Is it the same in the mind of our customer, right? So one of the things we want to do is we want to level set all of that. What are the expectations of our customers so that we are gauging ourselves appropriately? So there's more work to be done, a lot more surveys that we want to do, and actually even try to get even more real time lag of a couple of days, more surveys done so we actually understand what's going on. So.
Thank you very much. And in the interest of moving us forward, I wanted to make sure that I thank PRR for your work on this and your continued dedication to evolving it. Really appreciate this information and this insight. Clearly, surveying is art meets science, and I think we have a very good lens here within the board of individuals that understand the process well enough to know where to place the grain of salt in the perspective of this. No matter how much we dig, there's always opportunity to really learn, and we all have access to our community members. The focus groups are a fantastic way to dig deeper. Within the knowledge we have today from this survey, I think we're in good hands with the board in understanding what sample size means, what methodology says. Certainly everything going online, in my mind, it creates a certain pool of potential respondents that are more online savvy. And we know, regardless of the methods, the hardest to reach individuals, the hardest to reach voices are the most likely to be invisible in these types of mechanisms. So we must continue to strive to reach those voices. They are the ones that we want to serve, the ones that really need that extension. So with that, I want to bring us back to getting into the next presentation, which starts touching on the safety and security pieces and connects us to 2030. And then we had 60 minutes of time to really explore all this. I'll try to keep us honest as we get through the program today, because I value your time, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Sounds good. There's one last slide I just want to bring your attention to. This slide is a poll done by Metro. It's not done by PRR. It's done by a company that is hired by Metro, and Metro tracks the favorability ratings of government agencies throughout our region and actually the state. There's one thing I want to point out to you, and that TriMet has the highest favorability rating of any government entity. And I want to stress, this is something that we cannot take for granted. And because this level of support lets us do a lot of things and is what will help us achieve our 2030 goals. And it's why we work every day to maintain it that level of support and work even harder every day to improve upon it. So I just wanted to track this because it's a great way and lead into our next presentation. And that's really about how we are, if you want to go to the next, thank you, and even the next one too. As a PRR team, they walked you through the ANA, and I don't know if you saw on each slide, there was a key finding. And what we wanted to do is bring all of those themes of the key findings and marry it up with the pieces of our Vision 20 goals. And so that's what I'm going to quickly walk through with you this morning, because we want to use data as a way to drive direction. And in this case, our attitude and awareness survey is a great point of data, and it's a great way for us to measure ourselves. Next slide. So again, as we go through each slide, you'll see the selected piece of our Vision 2030 goal and how we plan to address the findings. In this case, infrastructure. And to address the findings, we're going to look to prioritize infrastructure investments to make our system more reliable and safer. So reliable, safer, more service, all constant themes that you heard through the ANA survey. And as you've seen through the results, it will be important for us to maintain our current riders and welcome new riders to the system. Next slide, please. Community. You know this one. You know that strong relationships matter. We cannot achieve our Vision 2030 goals without our partners and strong support from the community. We want to engage with the community to understand their concerns, especially among non-riders, and develop targeted strategies to raise awareness and approval. And I would point one more thing, is to educate them on the benefits of transit, because I think that we've actually lost that during the pandemic. All of this because our reputation and our overall favorability rely on it. Zero emissions. We have long heard from our community that they want cleaner air. We have been a solution for years to help clean the air in our region, from creating the transit mall that provided easier access to transit, to our switch to renewable diesel, to testing electric buses. We will continue to explore further efforts to address our climate challenges with zero emissions buses. You should know this, because we know the state, our region, and the 3 counties we serve will not reach their climate goals without TriMet, our transition to zero emissions buses, and by us increasing service. Information technology. We want to make it absolutely easy for riders to hop on board TriMet. You asked that good question around how easy is it to pay your fare. We want to make it even easier if we can. Whether it's your first time or you're a frequent rider, we want to continue to lower the barriers of riding by using technology solutions to address the need for convenient, timely, and accessible information for our riders. Ridership. As you know, our ultimate goal is to increase ridership through Vision 2030, because we know the benefits to the region are great. Less congestion, cleaner air and water, increased freight mobility, more mobility options for our riders, and ultimately, a positive impact on our community through increased access to opportunity. Safe, clean, convenient service is important to attract and retain ridership. We have heard it through this survey, and we're working on addressing it through our Vision 2030. Experience. A number of our efforts will impact the overall customer experience of our rider. While each piece of the customer experience puzzle will have its own plan, we want to make sure that we are improving the overall customer experience by focusing again on accessibility, safety, and providing equitable service to meet the diverse rider needs. And when we talk about equitable service, we listen to the concerns and the needs of our community. And Director Gonzalez, in all of the languages too that they speak, and in every place that they are, we need to be there. We want to be inclusive, and we want to work as hard as we can to be accessible to everyone. And then an overall welcoming system. All of these things, all of these pieces, that the key finding themes that you've heard, all of the work that we're doing with our Vision 2030 goals, all of these things we're working on create a welcoming atmosphere for our community, our riders, and let's not forget our employees as well. By implementing the various initiatives we can create, and we can renew our system to be absolutely welcoming. We can provide a safe, positive, and inclusive experience that fosters a sense of belonging, and we want that. Finally, safety and security. And you heard from our Chief Operating Officer, Bonnie Todd, and our Executive Director of Safety and Security, Andrew Wilson, at your last board meeting. And they presented all of the efforts that we're doing to bolster our safety and security efforts on board. There's a lot more to do, and you're going to hear more ideas today. We cannot fulfill our mission to the community or to our riders if we're not safe. Safety is not just our core value, but as you've heard in the survey, key for riders to come back to the system and for us to achieve all of the benefits we have laid out in our Vision 2030 goal. I will stop there. There's a lot more work to be had for our Vision 2030. You've heard the results and the key findings. I'll leave it there for any questions.
Thank you for that rundown. A lot of dots to connect here, and I don't see any questions coming right now from the board. I will say, per our agenda, we've got time for a little bit of a break to process some of this before we hear specifically about the safety and security progress that has been made. And again, we have time after that for some discussion. So, barring any questions at this moment of the things that have been brought here, I will propose. I do see a question coming. It's okay, and I will propose, in the interest of time, we had a 10-minute break. I'd like to see if 5 is okay with the board. Take a bio break. Okay, good. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Director Frisbee for a question, and then we'll take our break.
I feel like I'm digging myself into a hole with my fellow board members, so I'm sorry. But I just want to flag 2 things that I think we also heard pretty clearly from the Attitude and Awareness Survey, which is the reason people take TriMet is because they don't want to deal with traffic and they don't want to deal with parking. And to me, that says they're looking for convenience and they're looking for affordability. And I would just encourage us in this process to think about how we continue to lean into those pieces. And then, frankly, from a policy perspective, particularly as we talk about revenue, like, I think as an agency, we want to make sure that the city of Portland doesn't get rid of parking fees, right? Because that is actually an important piece here. There are policy components that our partners engage in that have a real impact on our ridership. And we, as a transit agency who works really hard to bring externalities into our system, we need our partners to also bring externalities into their policy decisions. And so I'd love to see that reflected. And then a tiny note, JC, your presentation sometimes talked about non-riders and sometimes talked about potential riders. I just think they're all potential riders. So I would love to see that language reflected.
That's awesome.
And I will make a tiny note, which is I really appreciate the 60-minute discussion that we have. I'm a little concerned about the fact that it's narrowed just to safety and security, because I think that is clearly a priority and a concern for both current and potential riders based on what we just heard and from the data that we know. But there are lots of other factors that are going into our ability to meet 2030. So I'm feeling a tiny bit restricted, and I'm just going to acknowledge that, and I will probably go off topic in that discussion.
We look forward to opening this up after the safety discussion. We are not going to truncate just to that, but yes, Vision 2030 encompasses all of that.
And there's more to come on that too.
So with that, I'm going to propose we begin our 5-minute break. We will see you back, reconvene at 10:25. Thank you very much. work our way towards a discussion. All right. Welcome, everyone, once again. We've regrouped. Please prepare yourselves for the safety and security presentation. We've got before us today Bonnie Todd, TriMet's Chief Operating Officer, Andrew Wilson, Executive Director of Safety and Security, and Dan Blair, just off the main table here, Interim Director of Maintenance, who will be sharing some information with us and priming us for an opportunity to have a fuller discussion beyond safety and security, so that we can, immediately following the presentation, we'll be able to have that discussion as a board. So for in-depth questions or topics that require greater dialogue, please hold that discussion for after the presentation is complete. And with that, I will turn it over to the team.
Thank you. So good morning, President Gonzalez and board directors. Again, I'm Bonnie Todd, Chief Operating Officer. Coming off the heels of our annual safety and security report that you received last month, where we were able to impart our security challenges and how we're tackling them, we want to take this opportunity to share with you a few concepts that we've begun to evaluate. We're continuing our use of out-of-the-box thinking, as was described to you in that annual report. So we're excited to share today 3 concepts or program changes that we think have merit and have the potential to improve security on our system. The first 2 concepts will be presented by Andrew Wilson, our Executive Director for Safety and Security. The third concept is one that will be presented by Dan Blair, our Interim Executive Director for Maintenance, and it pertains to our MAX Systems daily hours of service. At first, it may appear to be unclear what that concept has to do with security. We were evaluating our hours of service because, frankly, I was surprised and concerned at how little time we have compared to what is typical for other agencies for regular maintenance on the right-of-way. And our maintenance leadership folks and General Manager Dessous shared these concerns as well. So as we began to discuss this, we quickly recognized a security nexus that makes this concept very worthy of consideration and further study. So with Dan's presentation on our max hours of service, we're able to pitch a concept that addresses several needs: a serious need for additional maintenance opportunities for a system whose infrastructure is aged and aging, and potentially an ability to seriously address some security challenges. So we look forward to hearing your thoughts about these concepts and any other ideas that you may have or ideas that are spurred from these presentations. Since these are concepts that are in the early phases of development, we'll be eager to dig in further using whatever input we receive from you today. So with that, I'll turn it over to Andrew to present our first 2 concepts to you.
Thanks, Bonnie. Good morning, President Gonzalez and TriMet Board of Directors. Great to be here with you today. Andrew Wilson, Chief Safety Officer and Executive Director of Safety and Security. As Bonnie said, we did go over a lot of the safety and security status quo, I'll say, here at TriMet in terms of the annual report last month. But I am going to go over a quick overview of some of the things that we've really been focused on this last year and some key successes that we've had this last year. So increased security presence, you've heard me talk about it time and again. This is a key emphasis for us. It's borne out, as you've heard, in the Attitude and Awareness Survey that folks do want that increased presence. So we're going to spend a little time on that this morning. I will say that operator safety panels, safety monitors on buses, these are things that are impacting people's perception on safety. And I do say it is a perception. There's a battle with perception that we have ongoing all the time as well. And I think that's going to be kind of talked about a little bit this morning, and it should be talked about. Access control expansion, this is going to be something that you're going to be hearing a lot more out of in the next few years. This is not something we can do overnight, but even as we heard this morning, parking, I think Director Frisbee was talking about, you think about our park and ride locations, garages locations, how can we make people feel safe in a parking environment to be able to get on MAX and on bus as well? So again, you can kind of see why we're headed some of those directions to increase access control at some of our outlying areas in the system. Live monitoring of camera feeds. You've heard about our security operations center that we're building. Some of you were on a tour this morning with me, seeing kind of the capabilities of surveillance that's out there. We'd like to have live monitoring and should have it this next year on all of our bus fleet. And we're looking into ways we can expand that on MAX as well. And so Lots of capabilities out there to be able to utilize technology. That 24-hour security desk or security operations center and connectivity for riders into that center is going to be very, very important. And enhanced rider communication tools, which we already have available, I talked about last month, for our riders, and we're going to see more of that. And then lastly, crime prevention through environmental design. We do need to build differently and look at some of our design criterias when we do expansion, and that is a key area of emphasis for us as well. So next slide, please. So here's some kind of just status for you as a board to consider in terms of the journey that we've been on over this last couple years. You can see a very, very dramatic increase in overall security personnel. This is again by design. Really appreciate Sam and Bonnie's leadership and investing in this area. It's been very good for us in the security department to be able to achieve better outcomes. And so some dramatic increases there. I will say I meet with peers around the country. I was actually speaking at a conference yesterday in Phoenix, which I think Director Frisbee was at as well. Increased presence and our strategic approach to having multiple tools to increase presence is really a sought-after design by the industry right now. And to Director Lewis's comments earlier, the teams that we have structured really were built out from Reimagine. And we really gleaned a lot from community in terms of how we actually approach safety and security here at TriMet. And I think we're bearing some really good fruit on that now, to be honest. So if we go to the next slide, please. There we go. So this is calls for service. So when you think about this particular reduction, this means that we're having less law enforcement respond to events on the system. It's a very good outcome because I think it shows that not only we're having not as many incidents, but we're also really providing a good response so that people don't feel like they have to be in an emergency scenario where they have to call a 911 call. One of the things you're going to hear more about and have already heard is a lot of the incidents that we have out on the system right now are what I've called Part 2 crime. I think you've heard they're behavioral issues. People have kind of a lack of respect for one another in ways that we haven't seen over the last several years. I think everybody's seeing that. It's an industry trend. We're seeing it across the country. So how do we get people feeling better about other riders' behavior in that environment, if that makes sense? Next slide, please. So again, incidents targeting employees, this is a real key metric and one that's really dear to my heart. I've said this before, but we really do feel our operators' experience, particularly when they're mistreated. That's a hit to all of us at TriMet, but I know particularly to Sam, Bonnie, and I, and others at this executive leadership level, this is the worst kind of outcome for us, is to have our very good operators and other personnel mistreated. So this is a great statistic. And again, born out of a lot of the other types of things that we've done. We're holding people accountable through our DA expansion. We have surveillance to be able to capture kind of some of these incidents. But a lot more work to do here, but there's a very good trend line that we've had sustained for some time now. And again, related to increased presence as well. Next slide, please. So we're going to present a couple program modifications today, just for discussion, things we're considering. One of the things that we have really focused on and bears out in the Attitude and Awareness Survey as well, rider perception of safety on MAX remains low. How can we impact that so that folks feel safe on MAX? Now, again, we're operating in a very difficult environment. I say that because people's attitudes and perceptions on safety are heightened. I think you saw that in that ANA survey. Again, there's some Portland-specific things, but industry-wide, this is also an issue, and I think we all know that. But media coverage of high-profile incidents, that really hits that perception. If you're considering getting back on the MAX and you hear a negative security story and you haven't seen it yourself, that's a significant, and we get that. So how do we find ways to increase people's perception of safety? And again, a clear rider demand exists for a more visible presence. And again, you've seen that in the ANA study. And we've also heard it in rider and operator feedback and from others as well. Next slide, please. So benefits of increased presence, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but obviously visible security improves rider perception. We've seen that. I will say that presence increase rider perception as well. So just having folks out there is a very good outcome. Real-time reporting by security professionals. If you have a security professional on site when an event occurs, that leads to a better outcome in terms of resolution. There is a decrease in cleanliness issues and biohazards as code issues are addressed up front and effectively. Enhanced rider and employee safety, as we've seen, some of the trend lines, they're very favorable. When you increase presence on the system, you do have an enhanced rider and employee safety outcome. And of course, more immediate code violation response and repeat offender management increases with increased presence as well. Next slide, please. So program modification 1. So these are just some considerations that we have at this particular time. One of the considerations is to place, to make sure we have staffing adequate on the security standpoint to place 1 security guard on each train consist. That's 2 connected cars, a train. You can see kind of the estimated cost of that. And I won't spend a lot of time on the numbers right now. I want to talk a little bit about the next slide, which is going to talk about what we see from an enhancement standpoint. So with program modification 1, as conditions in the area improve, the need for security personnel in the system may decrease. So if we do ramp up for a time through that program modification, we could bring that number back down as conditions improve. Security contracts allow for staffing flexibility. Again, that same kind of concept. We have a little bit more flexibility in terms of how we bring those numbers down if we get, let's say, law enforcement back up to a degree and also riders return. I think this is not going to be a surprise to anybody, but riders returning also creates good safety and security outcomes. So as we see more riders on the system, that's a trend line across the country that people can track. So, but there is this part that we're in right now where getting folks feeling safe enough to return so that they create those outcomes, that's the space we're in right now, and I think that's where the complexity is. And of course, security hourly rates will likely need to increase above current rates. We're already seeing that this year. Security just costs more. There's inflationary pieces to that, and just cost of living increase type pieces. But there's also a competitive market right now for security. So, and that's 1 program modification. This is program modification 2. So just an alternative approach we're considering. And that's to provide increased security presence through the Customer Safety Supervisor program. Now, Customer Safety Supervisors, it's important to recognize, they do code enforcement. One of the components of code enforcement is fare enforcement, but I will say that there's lots of other codes, up to 49 that they're approaching. And sometimes it's difficult to even get to fare because you're approaching another code enforcement issue that's out there. So I just say that this team is a great team. They also respond to winter weather events. They activate for all kinds of different customer service type functions. But the primary function really is that code enforcement piece amongst a bunch of others, right? So just as an FYI. And so we have some numbers for consideration of what we could do with that team, up to doubling that team. So the first level would be to increase 8 with an additional 1 lead CSS. We've got some ideas about what that could do for us if we did that, and you can kind of see that sample coverage that would give us with 8 and 1 lead CSS, basically another shift at a different location. 16 would give us kind of a little bit more 24/7 coverage at a different location, and then obviously the doubling effect would just allow us the capability to provide increased code enforcement during all service hours. We are very strategic with this team, and you've heard me talk about kind of code enforcement missions that we do in partnership with all the other teams, so we don't lose track of people and we have the right resources out there for folks. But increasing the team gives us a little bit more flexibility in that approach and how we approach the strategy of code enforcement out in the system. Next slide, please. So again, modification 2 considerations, just for you to think about. Customer safety supervisors enforce code on the system and issue citations. So this is that group. Again, we have lots of different teams sort of approaching safety out in the system, which is by design. This is the group that really does code enforcement. Code compliance addresses up to 49 different types of violations. So in TriMet Code 28 and 29, you can actually review those if you'd like to, and I could send those out to you. But you can kind of see what those code violations are. But there's quite a few, and so there's lots of things that this team does. I will say that the team, when they engage on code enforcement missions, a lot of times folks just leave the train or the bus and we can't track them down. That isn't necessarily a bad outcome. I'll say that because if you're on there and you know you're violating a code, or maybe you've got an outstanding warrant or any kind of other, and you see code enforcement get on the train, let's say, and people are removed from the train, that's not a bad outcome for TriMet. We don't want those folks impeding our riders' experience. So just something to consider. And customer safety supervisors are full-time TriMet employees by ATU labor contract. So again, a little bit less flexibility with this one because we're actually adding staff, but it's just a consideration. And next slide, please. I think we are done with that portion. Yep, I'm gonna, Mr. Dan, sir.
Good morning, Board President Gonzalez and board members. I'm Dan Blair, Interim Executive Director of Maintenance Operations. Next slide, please. TriMet's light rail service begins at 2:59 a.m. and ends at 2:12 a.m., meaning there is just 47 minutes break between the end of service and the start of the next service day. Peer agencies have gaps or system closures that range from 1 hour and 37 minutes to 4 hours and 50 minutes, with an average of 2 hours and 30 minutes closure per night. We compared 10 agencies. I have listed 4. Hours of service differ from actual maintenance time available, what we call the maintenance window. The maintenance window for a section of the alignment is a function of when the last train of the night leaves the system and the first train of the day enters the system. For us at TriMet, the most critical portion of the TriMet track system is the banfield. This is our oldest and most traveled section of the alignment. Our track availability on the banfield is 1 hour and 23 minutes. When you include time to shut down power and the time needed to move high rail vehicles to the job site, our best maintenance window is about 1 hour. Next slide, please. Ridership is very low between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m., making this service very costly in a per passenger perspective. A short maintenance window reduces the time for maintenance activity. Reducing hours of service would extend the maintenance window and allow more productive time for a maintenance-away workforce. Longer service hours increase wear and tear on rail infrastructure and vehicles. By extending the available track time for maintenance, less labor will be required to maintain a given section of the alignment, therefore saving money. The more hours our system is in operation, the more maintenance it requires to maintain a state of good repair. And finally, there is a significant increase in security events in the late night and early morning hours. Next slide, please. There's a steady and significant decrease in ridership after the PM peak. The total average ridership between 2 a.m. and 2:59 a.m. is just 10 passengers for all of MAX. Next slide, please. The rate of safety and security delays substantially increases after 1 a.m. Between 2 a.m. and 2:59 a.m., passengers are 20 times more likely to experience safety and security-related service delays. Next slide, please. Shown here are some alternatives for the reduction in MAX service hours. Reductions are shown in 30-minute increments. You'll see a corresponding increase in the maintenance window. You'll also see cost savings and cost increase. The marginal cost savings only includes operator labor and LRV maintenance. There's also a cost savings from a reduction in security personnel. There's added cost for late night bus service to fill in for reduced MAX service. Savings are likely to be higher when you include total reduction in operating costs for the system, but for the initial estimates, we wanted to understate the savings until we can further refine these estimates. All savings are related to the reduction in security. Any labor saved from rail is then required to deliver the bus replacement service. Next slide, please. Having a larger maintenance window will help the performance of regular periodic testing and maintenance, as well as larger special projects, reducing the need for lengthy shutdowns that impact our riders. For example, if we had a 4-hour maintenance window on the Banfield, the tie replacement project, which you've heard discussed, could have been done as part of our nightly maintenance. Again, reduced or eliminated disruptions to our passengers. A larger maintenance window would also help support long interval maintenance activities such as ultrasonic rail testing and rail grinding and resurfacing, as well as create more opportunities for pilot projects designed to increase system resiliency. Next slide, please. Replacement bus service can deliver an equivalent level of service during this time of day. The longer maintenance window benefits passengers as well. As we saw in the previous slide, a much higher rate of delays late at night related to safety and security incident. After 11:30 p.m., they are 4 times more likely to experience these types of delays. A longer maintenance window means fewer shutdowns for stated good repair projects. More track time equates to a more increased reliability in our system. Next slide, please. Some things to consider. If TriMet does decide to shorten the hours of service for rail, when would we implement this change? Is this permanent, or is this a long-term temporary solution? A full analysis will need to be conducted on the impacts of these potential changes. Thank you.
Yeah, that's it. We can get back to you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you very much. Well, it sounds like if there's nothing more from the team, I appreciate your time and you bringing these suggestions forward. Clearly, there's a case to be made for these proposed changes, and because they impact riders, there would be a lot of compliance. Title VI analysis would be triggered, and ultimately, the options for our riders would be affected. So now I'd like to transition. We're going to move into some board discussion time. Clearly, we can talk specific to the items that have just been presented, or open it up beyond that. We allocated until 11:45 to be able to talk, so that's just a little under an hour. I really appreciate you getting through the content quickly, because at this time, we get to hear from one another, and this is really the operative moment of why we are here. There's an opportunity for us to talk about what we as an agency can be doing based on what we've heard from the surveys, based on what we've heard presented as some ideas. We can respond directly to those, as well as has already been brought up by Director Frisbee, we can talk about what sort of role our partners can play in this process. So not only do we not want to confine ourselves to safety and security, we want to talk broadly as an agency and think about our region. I encourage us to consider what from our partners would be instrumental for us to achieve these things. I've already noted down that we're going to ask the City of Portland to increase their parking fees, but those are ideas. Nothing's off the table. At least we get to give the agency today, the public record, and our agency partners a little bit of insight into where our minds are as to how we're going to achieve our objectives. And again, I'll do my best at facilitating the back and forth. And if you raise your hands or just throw paper in my direction, I'll do my best to give us all a chance to speak. So with that, I'd like to open up the floor. I see Director Kellogg, you have your hand raised. And Director Kim, did you have a comment as well? Okay, we'll have you go after. Thank you.
Thank you. President Gonzalez, thank you for the presentation. I want to start with yours first on the hours of operation. Is this every day we're 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. or 3 a.m. to 2 a.m.?
This is weekday. Weekend is a little different, but very similar. in
Okay,
hours of
because
operations.
my initial thought here was, why are we providing service on Monday through Thursday at 1 o'clock in the morning, right? There's no statutory mandate that we do that, right? This is just what's been the operating condition.
There is not that I'm aware of. I think that my experience at other transit agencies, sometimes agencies do these things for different reasons. It could be political pressure. It could be something that they thought would work because they had such an amazing, resilient system or something, and they wanted to give as much service to their customers, as they can. I will say that I've been in the industry a long time, and I've worked at a number of rail agencies. I've never seen a service day that is this long on light rail, and it was very, very striking to me because we do have a system that's aging, and every minute that we can get out there helps us. And it keeps us from inconveniencing our passengers because at some point you have to do the maintenance, and at that point it usually means shutting down for an extended period of time.
Right, and I couldn't see any data that supported operating in those late hours where the ridership is really low, and in fact, there's data that would suggest we shouldn't because of the increase in incidents and security.
The incidents and the cost per rider. I mean, I thought about that last night. It would take a little, I'd have to grab some numbers from Nancy and things like that, but when you have 10 people in 1 hour and you've got probably half of the service based on frequency and stuff that you do when you've got 4,000 or 5,000 people out there, there's just nothing efficient about that either.
Okay, well, pending further comments today, I mean, my initial suggestion here is let's implement this and implement this soon. So I've got other comments, but I'll let everybody get around.
Thank you. Thank you. And Director Kim, before I jump over to you, just a point of clarification, really. These ideas being brought forward today, we're not being asked as a board to vote on them or make a decisive decision. This is a rare opportunity for the agency to present some crazy thoughts and just kind of see what sticks, the spaghetti on the wall concept, and see what sticks, see where our mind is, how we respond to such ideas. But so that's really, I think, where we are today. So with that, by all means, please share your perspective on what you think about these ideas. Director Kim.
Yeah, thank you for this presentation. One immediate question I had was how to measure transit deal with the lack of maintenance window on those major ones, right, that are running 24/7. So I was just curious if you had information on that. But on our transit, I think about bringing the best value to our riders, as we all do, right? And the best value includes safe ride, convenient ride, affordable ride, whatever it may be. And I'm thinking about the best value overall. And similar to the conversations we had in our recent fare increase conversation, how can we as the agency bring the best value for this current riders and riders of tomorrow? And I think, I appreciate your team bringing this to our attention because, the data is pointing one way. We have to maintain them so that we survive. There is tomorrow. But the question is, how do we maintain them in an expensive way that takes away resources for the 3 a.m. to 1 a.m. crowd, or in a way that adds value to the agency as a whole? So I'm all for, conducting a full analysis for the option one of, not an option, but because it's a concept, right? The ending at 1:12 a.m. Why don't we do full analysis to see what other, issues that we're not spotting right now can come up. So that's one thought I had. And modification 1 and 2, we're not focusing on numbers, but expensive. But, when aside from the numbers, when I think about the solution that we as the agency can bring to the table, solutions to the problems that are raised by the ANA survey, as well as all of the things that we're hearing personally, professionally, and all different avenues. Well, what are we doing for safety? And one concrete thing that we can certainly give is doing a modification 1, at least one of them, where we are doubling down. private folks would say, hey, we're throwing money at it. We're doing everything we can, not just verbally, but in terms of putting our resources where our mouth is. So I would love to explore more on what that would look like, because the perception on the potential action of other fellow writers, because that's negatively impacting our current actual writers. The perception, if the perception can be changed in monetary means and pump up the numbers where we can actually get to where we need to be 120, then I would be all for doing that. And I've had similar conversations with the directors here and the local electeds about family and family-friendly rides. Where can we bring our daughters and sons or relatives to this, or can we recommend them to go ride on their own when they don't speak their language and whatnot. So I think this is something very tangible that I would love to explore further. On this note, one informational question I had was the difference between the safety monitors and live safety monitors and the surveillance in general, whether it's live monitoring, whether it's recorded, whether it's someone on the other end looking. So we can have a chit-chat side, or you can inform us. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Andrew has a response.
Yeah, and we can talk more, Director Kim. But so just as the safety monitors are those television screens essentially you're seeing in the buses, where you're literally seeing a live feed of the interior that you're riding in. But live feed capability, that's the ability to do what we do in our surveillance room inside a bus or inside a MAX train. So we can literally pull up the interior. So if we hear it's, train number this, and there's an incident going on, we can literally in our security operations center, myself, others that have access to our program, can literally pull up that live feed and see exactly what's going on. It provides a response. It also provides accountability for how we respond to that event. There's just a lot of really good things with that. So that's the direction we're headed, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Director Kim. Director Frisbee.
Thank you all for your presentation and your work. I've got a couple questions, and I will actually focus on the topic at hand, although I will take a slight note and say that in addition to increasing parking revenue, would love to see us go after toll revenue a little more aggressively. Just thinking back to why riders choose to hop on board. But Andrew, I wanted to check in. You cited the Attitudes and Awareness Survey as directing or pushing the modifications you proposed. When I look at the survey, what I see is actually, by far, general safety improvements is the big request. But I do think it is worth noting that actually riders who said they would ride more, the things they would need to see, only 7% said onboard police or security, and only 5% said greater fare enforcement.
I believe there was another slide that had 44% were concerned about not enough uniform presence, and that was the same one that had 11% that were concerned that we would have more. So that's kind of, in the aggregate, we're looking at all of it, but I think that particular slide presented the most direct notion that folks are interested in greater visible security presence.
I think there's 44% of riders are concerned about the lack of transit police, and then 66% of non-riders, which is always that, who's riding and who's not riding. But it's actually, so yeah.
But 11, I think, that didn't want it.
There's 11 who say that the presence of transit police makes them feel unsafe. But you also see, if you go down to the motivators and changers, the next slide, slide 24, increased service frequency is more of a request than onboard police or security or greater fare enforcement. And so I am not opposed to what is being proposed. I want to be clear, but I would like us to be careful in our language that most of what riders are asking for is increased safety, and that is not necessarily the same thing as increased uniformed officers or even increased security. I think, Andrew, you've done a really good job highlighting the multiple factors that go into improve safety, whether it's environmental changes, whether it's the cameras. And so I want us to be precise, I think. And I would say I am interested in hearing and learning more about both of those modifications and their various spectrums within. I feel like it was actually 8 modifications, not 2. And one of the things I would also be interested in, if we are talking about more of the code enforcers, is are there ways, whether through board policy, other pieces, that we can prioritize some of the code enforcement that is the most problematic and is the most of a deterrent to other riders? I get a little more angsty about focusing on fair enforcement in that space.
Well, I think that if I can respond to that, I think that at this point that is not a problem because there is so much of the other stuff going on out there. They just really can't get to fair enforcement because they're much more concerned about the general customer's experience. And if you've got somebody using drugs or not having their clothes on or whatever, those are the kinds of things that they end up dealing with for the most part. So I get what you're saying. I think at the moment, though, I'm not sure a board policy is needed. We just don't have the ability to address fare evasion to the extent that we typically did previously.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I just get worried about, understandings based on the context of the moment that continue 10 years later. So would love to explore some way to do that. I will also, I think, I do believe that fair enforcement is a challenge, and I am interested in some of the hardening access opportunities and ways to address that are more of a deterrent rather than putting folks in conflict with the law as part of a fare evasion process. Again, different if they are evading fare and then smoking fentanyl on the max. But I'm thinking about kids. I'm like petty crime. So that is my note. Dan, I really appreciated the maintenance window discussion. And as both Director Kellogg and Director Kim have flagged, I think there are a lot of reasons that point to a much better system and a much better overall service for riders. I would be interested in, as it is explored more, understanding, 10 riders is a very small amount. Are those folks transit dependent riders? Who is that? And are we having impacts more on transit dependent folks, on folks of color, as we change that service? I understand the bus replacement, and I don't fully know, as someone who is not out that late anymore at this point in my life. I don't know the 11, well, I know the 11 p.m., but I don't know the midnight to 2 a.m. Headways for Max, but how much is that change from Max to bus in terms of headways? And are there ways that we could maybe do route planning to better serve those folks? So I would just like to dig into the details a little bit to understand, but I will say from a big picture perspective, I am really interested in learning more, and I appreciate the full suite of options that you put up from the 1:12 a.m. to I think 11:12 a.m. and the pieces in between. I certainly don't feel like I have the understanding to give specific guidance on any one of those right now, but would be interested in learning more.
So the way we set up for costs, the bus replacement service, it is an actual absolute exact substitute other than it is a bus. And it would go from station to station and basically act like a substitute train. There was another thing you said that I wanted to...
Oh, just impacts, demographic impacts for the current riders.
Okay. We will get into that. But again, one of the nice things too about the bus is you probably saw in the attitude and awareness survey, much fewer concerns about security on bus now these days. And it's interesting because a long time ago it was completely the opposite. Bus was where you had problems, you didn't have problems on rail. So it's interesting. But yeah, that's part of the additional work we will do is kind of dig down into that.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Director White, I saw you raise your hand. I'll interject briefly. I don't raise my own hand. It feels a little awkward, but I could, I suppose. And Director Lewis, I look forward to hearing from you at some point. I see your hand is raised as well, so you'll go after Director Way. There's a question the agency has posed of the board, and it's really what are our thoughts on the concept. And so I wanted to share mine as well. From my perspective, I completely understand opening up that maintenance window, and there's a lot of great rationale for that. Clearly, should we take on a step like that, a Title VI analysis would be triggered, where we would investigate exactly those questions Director Frisbee brings to the table. And I know as an agency, we don't just rest our laurels on we met Title VI or not. And so I would say, to the concept of opening the maintenance window, I think it's important to use that as an opportunity to understand, should we open the window and shorten service hours in the lower utilization times, to really deepen our understanding of who we are impacting. If it's 10 riders, what do we know about those 10 riders that might help us illuminate how we address their needs, if there's a gap, if there's a paratransit partner, or some way in which we can learn how to do better. And I personally don't see this option as a money-saving strategy in the end. It's really about maintenance. So my expectation would be that we are able to shift into more optimized service hours. My hope would be that, yes, we can use that time to add either more frequent service on existing lines, or take the opportunity to bring lines of service into areas that don't currently have them. And those would be informed, much like your maintenance window solution, by the ridership analysis. So those are my initial thoughts on that. With regards to the concepts 1 and 2, correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, but it sounds like it was choose your own adventure. It was like either this path or that path, or were you advocating both as parallel concepts?
Not necessarily. Those are just two program considerations we're considering simultaneously. So it could be and/or, it could be both.
Okay, understood. They had a similar. To me, they read in a similar way. You're ultimately talking about more people, more personnel, dedicated to the task of safety and security on the system. Whether they're housed with an ATU, whether they're contracted, seem to be where the differences lie, and there's flexibility impacts on that. Understood. I think from my perspective, this is something that reflects directly out of the ANA survey. I foresee that the service level that these folks provide will have to adapt as we address the more immediate concerns. As ridership goes up, the needs of what they focus on will change over time. My only thought on this one really comes down to how do we lean on against our agency partners in the rollout of this, because for us to meet this successfully, there's an increased cost associated with it directly, but there's also an increased value that we're going to be able to provide regionally. And so how do we intersect with our interagency partners on this rollout? That's the piece that I would be interested in, should we take these paths, to explore. I wouldn't want us to operate in a vacuum, and I certainly not financially and, of course, logistically. So I would want to know how those touch points begin to be leveraged as well. That's my thought.
If I could comment, those are excellent points. And I think it's going to be very imperative, if we engage in this type of thing, that we're actually trying to leverage it as much as possible in terms of an education campaign and involving others in what we're doing strategically. It was shared, I think, last month, the Fill the Max. I think Director Way kind of brought that thought process up. I'm really excited about that idea. I think that's a great idea. Director Kim talked about families riding the system again. I have children. I have put them on the Max. I want to see that kind of behavior again out in our city, and I think we're all headed that direction. So how do we leverage these short-term gains to win back our riders? I will say we are in a specific time where we're getting some folks starting to ride again that have not been on the system for a while. So we don't want to lose that time in place right now as folks get push to sort of be in a more return to office scenario? How can we, in a short term, really impact people? And while I'm talking, I'll share again too. Security presence gains with an hours modification. That was in the slides that Dan shared, but I would just say from my perspective, that gives us more force multiplication if we're not covering certain hours. So there's gains there too as well. And then just putting on my chief safety officer hat, we're moving towards more of a legacy system. We built some of these things in the 80s. We're going to have continual upgrades from a state of good repair standpoint, which we didn't envision when we had these service hours in the past. And I think everybody gets that, but there's a strategic gain there as well, and less disruption to the rider as we go through those if we have a larger service window.
Thank you. Director Wide, Director Lewis, and then Director Edwards.
Thank you. I do have a couple of follow-up questions. So one is really around that code enforcement piece and the couple different solutions that you provided, Andrew, particularly. I'm just trying to, again, I think this has been helpful. I just need more information and more data. And I guess my first question is, what does our success look like, right, when we do code enforcement? What are the metrics? What is our deliverables? You mentioned that there's 49 types of different code enforcements that we do. I would love for that to be part of like a presentation part 2, in a meeting in a setting like this, because it's one thing to just have it in an email to take a look at it, but it's another thing to really have more of a robust discussion as a board to look at, okay, these are the 49 types, right? And they range from spitting on the max to, again, carrying a weapon. And so, again, I would just really like us to look at just the code enforcement program more robustly. And then also, I just want to say that behavior modification is hard, right? So I, serve on a board in a school district, and so, it's not a one size fits all. You are changing you're not only addressing the individual behavior, but there's an entire ecosystem, right, that individual is operating in. So I just want us to kind of think about this in a way that is also, again, working with community partners, working with Multnomah County or different social services, so that we're not just like re-ticketing people and handing out citations to the quote unquote repeat offenders. But if we're really identifying someone that is like, okay, they've been on our system 5 times, they clearly haven't paid fares, what is the underlying problem, right, with that? How do we really address that individual's needs? I kind of feel like that's where we can kind of take it to that next level, so that, again, we're just not re-engaging with folks who really have other issues that are going on as they're interacting with our system. And then the other question that I have is, again, just tracking more data, right? What are the types of citations that we're doing right now? And then I know that in the attitude and awareness survey, there was obviously, again, that big line that goes directly correlating to recreation, and one of the main reasons why folks are using their system, which is great. So I'm curious, because fair collection is brought up and fair enforcement. Are we regularly out on the system when those Blazer games, when those huge events happen, to check fares? Because I would say that is where a lot of riders are using our system, is to get, to those games and concerts and et cetera. So how is that activity being equitably distributed with other times of the day when it's not Blazer games and Thorn games and all of that?
We can get that for you, because that's really good. I think those are great questions. So, and I think it's important that we, engage. If you look at the attitude and awareness, recreation is one of the highest drivers right now. So how are we impacting that? We'll get that for you.
Great, thank you. And then I just have a quick comment. So around the max reduction in hours piece, I'm just hopefully assuming that we're going to do a Title VI equity analysis, full-on analysis, to make sure that, again, no disproportionate impact to populations. And then I would like to, I think Director Frisbee's point earlier about really, the attitude and awareness survey I think is a great place to start, but we need to do a ton more work around focus groups and really digging into, again, transit dependent riders and expanding languages, and really digging down into their, right, really perception of the way that we are doing our safety security work, and also around the question around the possible reduction of max hours during those times. So I just would like us to really use the A as a starting point, and then just go deeper with doing more focus groups and more research.
Director Lewis.
Oh, thank you. My comments are mainly a few conversations back. I think it was Director Frisbee and I think Director Thomas had asked, who are those late night riders? I mean, who's out there at that time of night? And I can add a little insight, but I also wanted to add to the last presentation that as for TriMet, we can track when those riders get on the facilities, whether it's the buses, and where they get off. But some of those late night riders are working for the sheriff's office, myself. We do release inmates into the community late night so that they do not, there is a process that the county has in releasing inmates that happens pretty much every night. And so there is a system in place that we release those inmates usually after 11 o'clock, after the system is less impacted by inmates being released from jail. The other is our essential workers from hospitals. I mean, I know this, mainly wondering, why does she know this? Is because I came off of my shift at midnight downtown, Multnomah County in the jail. And so I rode all the way to Gresham on Max. And so there were the same faces. One is the medical staff from the two hospitals. I mean, those are your 24-hour facilities that do not shut down. So you do tend to find nurses, essential workers going out to Amazon and FedEx. A lot of us shop. I know a lot of shoppers out of Winco because it's 24 hours are on the facilities because they feel safer and not impacted by the rush hour. So that's just a little bit of who those late hour workers. And so they really are coming out of on the transit system from impact places such as Multnomah County downtown, Amazon and FedEx out in East County, and then they're dispersed of where they're going. So that information should be available to when you do change the late systems of how you impact and who you're impacting. That's all. Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Just a quick comment. Thank you for that, Dr. Lewis. One thing that we didn't put up because we're just trying to get the concepts out there is there's a modification basically to what Dan was presenting where we could possibly shorten by an hour or two at night and an hour in the morning because we also in the very early morning in that 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock hour, I think we had 60 riders. And we also have a higher number of security incidents in that hour as well. So maybe it's tackling it at both ends so that we can still meet the needs of the people, the types of people, the demographics that you're describing. So we'll take a look at that as well.
Thank you. Director Edwards and then Director Kim.
Thank you, Chair Gonzalez. Thank you very much for your presentation. I think this has been good, and thank the board for a lot of the issues that have been raised. I had a question, I guess, about the employee assaults and the threats. How deep are those? What do those look like? What are the demographics of those that are doing the assaults and the threats? And what is the protocol? If I'm an employee, I'm an operator, and I either get assaulted or there's a threat that I think is credible. What's the protocol for my good and welfare, because I know, we've had our incentive, and we still have an incentive to try to make sure that we keep our drivers and don't lose our operators. And so that's one area of concern. And then I think that also, I think it's important that we do a survey of our employees, not only are those that are working under a labor contract, but those also in the administrative area. I think it'd be good to do a survey of everyone that works at TriMet, because we're concerned about a culture here, and that culture needs to be pervasive throughout. It needs to be from top to bottom, bottom to top. And so I think it's very critical that we do a survey of everyone, not just those people that are riding, because if we don't change our way of thinking and make sure that we're all on the same page, then it doesn't make a difference. Those riders are not going to be serviced the way that they should. Another part is those citations that are issued. What do those citations look like? What is the protocol again? If I get a citation, what does that mean? Do I just tear it up and throw it away? Or does it have some kind of meaning? What is again, the demographics of those that are getting the citations? Are they younger folks, older folks? Are they black, white, Asian, Hispanic? What do they look like? And so I think that all that information needs to be put into the hopper so we can deal with that and analyze it and see what else we can do to improve those things. I think that's important as well. So those are my comments, questions, and remarks.
Great questions, and a lot of the latter part of that we went through in Reimagine. Dr. Lewis will remember just how much demographic information can we get out of those folks that were actually. It's a tricky space because not everybody that conversation and how people identify and that kind of thing it makes it difficult to get good demographic information. But there is information there, and I just say that as we're going towards one of the things with our Security Operations Center is increased security software, so that we can actually have real-time software advances, so that we can really track interactions and things of that nature. So I do think we're headed in a better technological response kind of way from that perspective. Going back to assaults, it's important that when we talk about assaults, we're not necessarily talking about what the criminal statute of an assault actually means, because we're very proactive in tracking here at TriMet. In fact, we started this in 2019, tracking verbal assaults, threats, intimidation, spitting, throwing slushies, all the kind of garbage that goes on out there. All those things that I just listed would probably not actually track as an assault. You have to, to meet the definition, criminal definition of an assault. The reason I bring that up is we started that program in 2019. It's interesting, the FTA is now asking for that in NTD reporting, verbal assaults. And really, honestly, we conditioned them for that because they were watching areas like us, which are a little bit more proactive in recognizing that a verbal or a threat, an intimidating kind of assault, actually is a leading indicator of bad things down the road, right? So I just bring that up because there's a lot of different aspects that go into that number. It up to including a physical assault where you've got somebody who's actually punched or hit or something along those lines. And we do break that out because it's important to understand, okay, this is a threat, this is a physical assault. One of the key, obviously, areas of assault that we've seen in the past was related to bus operators' assault. That extended barrier is really helping drive that number too. Because if you're talking spitting or you're talking slushies, when you had that portion above the barrier that was open, or as close to the windscreen as possible that was open, you could get around and you could throw something at somebody. That would technically trigger as an assault. That is now lowering because of that barrier. And so there's lots of different things we're doing that are driving that number. It's not just presence, safety monitors, all those types of things that are out there. And so it's a strategic approach. But I will say it's very encouraging to see that those numbers are coming down. We're kind of bucking a trend nationally. If you go to conference and you hear about employee assault, on average across the nation, it's still going up. And again, we're not talking about violent assaults going up as much, but that part two, spitting, throwing things, which has a huge impact on our operators and obviously our retention and recruitment efforts. So great points.
Thank you.
Director Kim and then Director Kellogg.
Thank you. I think as a board, as we're conversing here, it would be very important for us to think through and process the implication of the presence of transit police or increased presence of transit police. And I think about the 11% who are more uncomfortable. And I also think about how can we make sure that the 78% was it of the safety concern needs are met, whatever that means, including transit police, right? And I don't think we need to be in agreement at all, just like any other matters, of course. But at least we be on the same page about what the potential implications are, so that nothing surprises us. So I think there'll be a good state of good repair. I think if we execute it right, it is a money-saving measure, right? And I think it goes directly to our fiduciary duty as board members. If we execute this right, because without proper maintenance, I mean, we're at best kicking the can to the future boards. I think at best we're doing that. So some sort of implication. Maybe it's neither, maybe it's not something that was presented today, but so as we continue to talk about it, there could be a new concept that we actually meet the need of our system, so that we can continue to serve our folks in decades to come. And lastly, on code enforcement, this is a sort of a question in there for Shelley as well, actually. But I'm thinking maybe, it touches on ridership, it touches on sentimental issues, feedback, but I wonder if this could be a legal one too, where, hey, what's the legal minimum set on TriMet for code enforcement in terms of what we must provide for the well-being of our riders? And generally we don't want to look at the floor, but as we sort of as we consider what can we do well, I think it's helpful for me to see what's the absolute legal minimum we must meet, and then we can talk about what all we are doing and we could be doing. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Kellogg.
Thank you. President Gonzalez, this is probably going to be a little long-winded. First, I want to thank my fellow directors. Your comments have been really insightful, have helped me think through this, and now I've got a jumble of things I want to try to organize to get some answers to. The first one, though, relates back to Director Edwards' question. I didn't hear an answer to it, and I know you're on the spot, but what if somebody gets a citation today and just decides to throw it away? What happens there?
No, I mean, it's a great point. So we do have exclusions and citations to think about, right? So citations we have, and this falls more in our legal realm in the sense of how you can actually work through what that citation is. And we have some options, which our Director of Legal Services, Eric Van Hagen, has worked on over the years too, for folks to actually work through fines, citations, et cetera. And then on the exclusion side, people are often given a day exclusion or, longer. Obviously, in real traumatic events, we actually have a full-time exclusion. But what I'm going to tell you is that it's very difficult. We do have situations where people will provide Bugs Bunny as the name of the recipient of a ticket, and so that's going to be crumpled up. It's going to be thrown on the floor. No, there's going to be a very difficult follow-up on that, right? Also, we have situations where we have people on exclusion list who go 2 blocks down the train and get right back on, right? Because how are we keeping them off the system, right? So this is, again, back to that presence. And when I talk about repeat offender, that's usually what I'm talking about is people that we have told, you're issued an exclusion currently, you're not supposed to be on the train. But how do you enforce that without really that real-time reporting, surveillance capability, increased presence to be able to ensure that that person doesn't get back on the train? That is a tricky piece, not only for us, but that's a transit issue. And I say that because I do think there's ways we can approach that better in the future, and some of that is related to access control. But the reality is right now, if we issued a citation or an exclusion, our ability to ensure that that person complies with that directive, very limited, right? I will say when we do missions, and we get out with the transit police and that sort of thing, and we kind of approach a code enforcement issue like out at Gateway or whatever, oftentimes people will show up in that with an outstanding warrant and they've been excluded. And so that is a punitive assessment that we can put towards this. But that's with law enforcement in conjunction. And part of that is because they actually can identify that person. We are at a difficult spot for our customer safety supervisors because if you respond the name Bugs Bunny, we're not going to be able to move that forward. That is part of that safe transit piece that we've been talking about recently in terms of really going down to Salem to see if we can get some better tools to be able to do identification for our teams, and we're working on that with our lobbyists. So those are some things that we're working on, but it's kind of a jumbled, long-winded response. But the idea that we can issue a citation and do that behavior modification well, that's the tricky spot for us. And I do think it involves community education. We've talked about getting into high schools and doing kind of education campaigns with folks about rules of the ride, those kinds of things. I think that is really important. It's important to get community back involved. But the reality is when you issue a citation or exclusion, it's dependent upon having presence commensurate to be able to ensure that's followed.
Right, and that's kind of what I'm getting at is, I mean, I should probably already know this, but if somebody doesn't pay a citation and we are able to identify them, is there any way that can be elevated to, a criminal matter, bench warrant, some sort of collection, if you will?
Yeah, it depends on the amount of, the types of violations and how they've accumulated. But I'll tell you that this is one of the reasons why it's really good to have a DA and a misdemeanor DA, because that's exactly the direction we're trying to go, is to track those repeat offenders and make sure they're being held accountable. I think there's lots of ways we can get after that, hopefully from an educational and preventative measure before we get to that point. But we do have some folks that have caused a lot of disturbances on multiple occasions. And it's really important to have DAs that are here working for us, tracking that with the teams and applying the appropriate accountability to that situation. It's not fair to our writers and our employees not to do otherwise. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. And I don't expect a concise, complete answer because these are confusing things. And I think something we do need to dedicate some time to. So thank you for that response. I'm going to jump back real quick to you on the hours of operation. Director Frisbee, some other comments about, who are these people that are riding late at night? And one of the things I've experienced out in the community and talked to people about their TriMet experience is the relationship that regular riders have with the operators, more so on the bus than on the train, of course. But I think that would be a great data point in terms of learning who these people are. I mean, how many are regular riders and the institutional ones that Director Lewis mentioned about coming out of the hospital, the hours, law enforcement and those. And that, so we could look at the routes kind of the same way we did when we realigned bus lines and everything else and say, okay, if there are 6 or 8 lines that, we're going to have repeat need for these, riders, then let's keep those open later, right? But the ones that don't have any ridership or sporadic ridership, eliminate those. So, it would be intense in terms of customization, but we've already done it with the routes in terms of where they go and where they stop. So this would just be another element to it, okay? Lastly, I want to talk about the safety and security aspect. And I want to start with kind of the concept of safety and security. And then the closest analogy I can make is the airport, right? You're not going as far and you're not traveling as fast and you're not checking your ID when you get on, but you can never get on an airplane without showing a ticket, right? And yes, things happen on the airplane after you've paid for your ticket and, that's just what it is. But I want to understand or examine how we can apply that concept to our transit vehicles, right? So I'm going to ask you and some of these are probably going to seem rhetorical questions, but they aren't. If I walk out of this meeting today and I go walk onto a bus and I just walk past the fare box, what happens?
Great questions. So one of the things that we don't do at TriMet is we don't make our operators fare enforcers. They're fare informers, right? And we're very specific to that because we've had lots of incidents related to assault in scenarios where people don't do. But they do chart that with a button basically saying that there was a fare evade. So we track that, right? We've had too many bad outcomes associated with folks really trying to maintain that kind of this bus is my environment and you can't be on the bus when you haven't paid for fare. and then ended up in a really terrible scenario where somebody's assaulted. So fair informing is a pretty tried and true practice, and we stick to that. Generally, on the bus side, interactions with people create a better engagement around that. Again, it comes back to riders being on the bus. People notice when people don't pay fare, and you have to kind of do that walk of shame on the bus as well. That's a good detractor. That's something that's absent on the MAX, which is important. And I will say that when you think about code enforcement, you think about citations and exclusions, that's only one portion of that picture. And I say that because a disruptive factor when somebody gets on and says, okay, we're checking fare, and 10 or 15 people walk off the MAX and they can't ride any further and that sort of thing, those are good outcomes in the long run because it shows, okay, I can't just ride this thing for free and get where I want to go. I got dumped in this area and I don't want to be here. So there are certain aspects to code enforcement and these missions activity which is disrupting bad behavior, which again kind of goes to that behavioral modification piece, although putting teeth to citations and that sort of thing is a little bit more tricky, if that makes sense. So I want to make sure I answer your question, though. When you get on the bus, what is we track that, but we do not put that operator in that position. Rarely, unless there's a significant disruption beyond that, will we take that to the next step and call for law enforcement, which may or may not show up for that type of an event, right? So this is where I think we have some significant challenges with actually dealing with those situations. And I think there's also some concepts too there that we have to be careful of. Is I totally agree. You've seen me talk about access control is the way forward, I think, in a lot of ways. But we also have to be cognizant of the fact that we don't want to create further impediments for people to be able to access the system. And so there's this healthy balance that we have to get to with that. Education is a part of that. Different programs are a part of that. So we've got to continue to move that forward, but just not make sure we're leaving anybody behind. So.
And thanks. Comprehensive answer. When the fare informer hits the button and it gets tracked, you said it's very infrequent that someone would come and write a citation for evading fare, right?
In a bus scenario, most likely. If you're caught up in a fare enforcement mission, for example, on the MAX, that might be a little bit different. You would actually get a citation. But again, if somebody runs off the MAX, we're not going to chase them. You know what I'm saying? So that's where it gets a little bit more complex in that sense.
Right. And your comments about, access and what I'm just going to call passive security, even though it isn't, but creating structures that are going to modify this behavior just because people won't otherwise have a choice. And I don't know if that equals up to some way to prevent access beyond the fare box on the bus if you don't pay your fare, right? But that would seem to me to be a long-term solution, right? One that we ought to at least talk about, okay? And in terms of your options that you've offered, the second one about adding more customer service and if that could have an effect on this fare evasion problem without being too invasive, then I also think that makes sense, okay? So the last thing I want to talk about is the MAX and fare enforcement there, because there is no fare box, there is no fare informer. People can just walk right on, and that's the way the system was created. That's what we have, right? And we've talked independently about, having access control at some of the more suburban stations where we would have the real estate to be able to build, some sort of access control. But on the MAX, downtown, and other places, you've talked about potentially increasing the presence on the system. And obviously there's a pretty significant human labor cost involved with that, right? But you also talked about perception, right? And the way this kind of plays out in my head is if we did a blitz of fare enforcement on the MAX, where riders would start to have that thought before they evaded fare that if I get on, the fare is going to be enforced, I can get in trouble for this, right? So that's going to deter the behavior. But also there's a publicity element to this that, we're not doing anything for publicity, but a side effect of this is that if news stories came out that, hey, look, there's security personnel on the MAX enforcing fares, like somebody's doing something, right? Which I think a lot of people are desirous for, the increased sort of the concerns about people's safety worldwide. And if people who don't ride or who have stopped riding see that and say, well, that's the reason I wasn't riding, now I can get back on, then we're back to looking at increasing our ridership, which is one of our goals. So I don't expect a response to that, but that's just my comment, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Way?
Thank you. This is fascinating. I think my comments are, and just my reflections is I think we need to be careful when we're talking about fair collection and fair enforcement and the feelings and perceptions of safety, because I think we need to be very careful, because and that's why, again, I want to look into the types of code enforcement, right, from the extremes of, okay, someone threw garbage on the max. As a result of that, like, did that create fear and trauma on riders versus someone who forgot $2 and change? Like, is that a scary person for me, right? Because of their actions of not paying fare. So I want us to be careful with the way that, because this is a safety and security conversation, so I'm glad that, we're talking about all the things, but for me personally, to focus, I just don't want, to focus so much on fair enforcement and correlating fair enforcement to safety, I think that's a weird correlation. So I just want to say that out there, because when I was in high school, for example, I forgot to pay a fare, and there was a fair enforcement officer who was very intimidating, who stopped me and made me feel like I was the worst person ever, and I was 15. And I do not ever want anybody, especially a young person or an immigrant or someone whose English is not a first language, to ever feel that way. So I come at this from a personal experience, but again, I also want to be careful, because this is a safety conversation, about not stigmatizing the people who evade fares as bad people in our society, in our community, that we should be fearful of.
Thank you, Director Wade. Director Frisbee?
Thank you, President Gonzalez. And I just want to acknowledge, I think, both of the previous two comments we heard, and and thank you to my fellow directors. This is such a nuanced space. And I do feel like I see the thread, right? And I'm sure you do too. You are much more knowledgeable about this than we are. There is a way to thread this needle, because I think Director Way's comments about, what is truly a safety and security risk and what is a feeling. But I think we also know, Andrew, as you said, that fare evasion is sort of a loss leader on more, I hated the term antisocial behaviors at first, when it started popping up, and now I think it's actually very accurate. So a loss leader on antisocial behavior. And finding ways to connect those two is important. I have an informational question, which is, I have a memory that I am not sure is correct, that there is actually a policy, the TriMet has a policy, and Shelley, maybe you're the right person to answer this, that if you are found to be evading a fare, but you qualify for the low income fare or one of our honored citizen fares, honored rider fares, you are not given a ticket or a citation, and instead you are given the tools to sign up for those programs. Can you confirm that? I think that's important context for all of us, and just thinking about punitive.
You're correct about that. They're given the option. They can either contest the citation or, go the typical route, or they can apply for low-income fare, qualify, and then that citation goes away. So yes.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thanks. In the vein of fares and fare enforcement, I wanted to share a few thoughts and reflections on this. I agree with Director Way. We have to be very careful not to stigmatize or associate very directly correlating fare evasion with folks being bad. But also acknowledge fare evasion is, as was also pointed out, one of those indicators of sort of other things, harbingers of other things to come. And I see fare evasion as our best opportunity to help elevate the standard of care, the standard of practice for what is responsible use of a system. And it's really on us as an agency to set the bar for what fairs accomplish. And I think there's the superficial tacit agreement of an exchange of goods and services. We hold up our end of the bargain, riders hold up their end of the bargain. There is the sort of good stewardship of public assets piece of this. We are all responsible users, and paying that fare is sort of that vote of confidence in the system and demonstrating a responsible use. It also occurs that there's folks that simply cannot pay the fare. They don't have that. They're in a rush. They don't have the cash. They left behind their hop card, or they don't have the money. And all of those are opportunities to learn about the user, to get to know the person, make a touch point. As operators, as fare enforcement folks get to know individuals, all of those reasons come into play. And all of those reasons are an opportunity to help understand each other better and encourage that responsible use. So I'm very optimistic that we're not sort of losing ourselves in the broad brush stroke of we don't like fare evasion and therefore it's a thing with law enforcement versus fare evaders. I do acknowledge that we're in an interesting moment right now where the responsible use model is not limited to TriMet. I mean, we're in a place where there has been just a general loss, from my perspective, of faith in our institutions. Police, fire, schools, justice. And so that ripples into how people perceive the transit agency and, by extension, the bus operator or the fare enforcement individual. And all of this is the symptom of something broader that we are sort of at the whim of. And so I encourage us to look at fare evasion as an opportunity for us to be able to elevate the dialogue, establish a decorum and understanding with the public that we serve. And in the end, ensure that it's our job and our fellow riders' job, Portland Public Schools' job, to educate us as citizens on what the programs are, how do we get access to those programs, and it also provides the opportunity for us to really lean into our community benefit partners who don't come with the same tarnishes of being a public agency. They're trusted allies, and I think this is where their biggest value to us resides. As trusted community allies, how do we establish a working relationship where our community partners are helping us establish a good standard, letting people know about the hotline, letting people know what responsible use is, what's okay, what's not okay, if someone's making you uncomfortable on the system, if someone's disrobing or taking care of personal hygiene and it's just not the most sort of sane or safe activity, whatever it may be. And I acknowledge we're far from that. And we have community partners out there that are, through philosophy that transit should be free, saying evade fares one and all, and encouraging that kind of I don't know about antisocial, but anti-responsible use behavior. Those are the opportunities that I think we have to stem the tide of that, bring our partners together to say, do we want an excellent system? Do we want a responsible use? Do we want the kind of decorum that allows us to see that this system is something that's for us all? Those are the opportunities I see in the fare evasion conversation. So when you hear me saying, we need to do more fare enforcement, it's not because I'm trying to capture the money that's being evaded. It's really capturing the standard of care that comes with what is, to me, the first instance of are we participating together in a civil society, or are we simply just operating on our own standard? And I think that's where I see it coming from. That's my perspective. Thought it worth sharing. I saw Director Wade. Did I miss Director Edwards? I didn't see when you brought it up. So I'm going to go this way. Yes, is that okay? We haven't heard from Director Edwards in a minute. So we'll go this way and then Director Wade. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think you really kind of summed up a lot. I guess when I look at TriMet, and I've always thought about TriMet, especially since being on the board, is we have an opportunity to do things differently to set a standard, to be the pilot, if you will, for other not only government agencies but private agencies as well. And when we do that, I think we do set a standard. Freedom is not free. I think everyone knows that. But and it requires responsibility. That's something we don't talk about very much. The more freedom we have, the more responsibility we have. That's just the way life is. It has nothing to do with financial, monetary, or anything else. It's just a fact of life. And I think when we start thinking about that, we have to look and think about our responsibility as an agency. I think when we do what we really want to do in regards to, because I would like to be able to pay my fare, get on the bus or get on the light rail, and have it be clean. I don't expect to eat off the floor, but I expect it to be clean. And I expect it to be safe and secure as well. I expect to greet the operator and the operator to greet me. And those are the kind of things that I'm looking for. And I think when we start doing that, we can make some changes. We're not responsible for the social climate in the world, but we can certainly change it a little bit in the small sphere in the area that we're in these 3 counties. I think it can spread from there. And I think we send a message to our young people who have, I think, real issues with what's valuable to them. And we can send a message and let them know that value is not dollars and cents. It's about character, and it's about what's important to us. And I think if we do that, then we've done our part. But it's going to come with a price, as everything does. And oftentimes that's a monetary price. But I think the main thing is that we change the attitude of who we are and what we're about, especially with all these things going on in the world today and the attitudes that people have, and people want to choose sides and pick sides. We're all mankind. Why did we have to pick sides? We're all humankind. We shouldn't be about picking sides. We're all on the same side. And so those are the things that I think that TriMet can do in our total attitude and our total behavior, because our culture will be different than others. And they'll look and say, gee, that's what we want to be like. And they'll start emulating what we do. So I think that's, and I think you summed that up very well, Mr. Chairman. So thank you.
I appreciate that. And point of order, I know that we have a very, very engaging discussion, and I see Director Wei has her hand up. We are coming to the allotted time frame for the discussion itself. General Manager Dessou will have some final next step comments, and I just want to make us all conscious of that. Clearly, this is a conversation that's near and dear, and will continue throughout our meetings, and we'll see it continue to come up in some of our board education sessions. Yes, absolutely. And so with that, I just wanted to point that out. Director Wei, I'd love to have your comments brought forward. And I just wanted to be cognizant of that. We're probably going to go a little bit past the hour because I want to hear from General Manager Dessou. And with that, please, Director Wei.
Thank you. I just have one question and one comment, or maybe 2 comments. What is the percentage of fare evasion that we have right now that we're tracking? I'm pretty sure it's under 20%. I don't know.
Yeah,
you tell me.
Do you want to?
I don't want to, but if I have
I
to,
can.
I will. So my guess, just based on my experience and what I see out there, I would say that it is absolutely greater than 20%. Okay. The methodology that we use here to determine that is also through a survey methodology that I believe is done out of, is it legal or is it communication? It's communications group. Okay. And I think the next time that is slated to be done is in the spring. I want to know those numbers, and I don't want to know them. I do think they're going to be worse than we believe they are. A, and B, I do think to Director Kellogg's previous comments about what's happening when our ridership is going up and our revenues going down, I feel like we can dig into that sort of mathematically. Some of that has to do with changes in our low-income programs and things like that. But if we can find a way to pull that out. I don't know if we could determine the actual evasion rate now, but we could certainly have a baseline that we can start with now that we can measure against as we go forward. So we're starting to talk about that. But again, to your original question, we have a particular way that we have historically done it here, and it's through some sort of survey mechanism, and it's currently looking like next spring.
Thank you. And then my follow-up comment is, again, going back to the attitude and awareness survey, where we saw clearly that 77% of the concerns around safety, right? Bringing this whole entire presentation back to safety and security. So it's very interesting how we went down just the fare evasion piece, because safety and security is the much broader topic, and the 77% came from the feelings about behavior, right? Fare, I think, was like less than 10% or something on that chart in terms of what people actually cared about. So, so going back to behavior, that is where I would like to see more data around the code enforcement. What are the types of behaviors that we're addressing? You know, is it the crimes? Is it, you know, smoking fentanyl, right? Like, those are the things for me as a board member I want to address. Like, I want to hit at those issues so that we can address the use of illicit drugs in our system, for example, or the people who are taking off their clothes or peeing or whatever it is. I care less about fares at this point and fare enforcement because of the limited resources that we have to expand our capacity. So those are just my comments.
And that's a very good point. And while I personally care a lot about fare evasion, I think that we're just not in a place where that can be our priority, top priority, because the way we are set up, it's a part of a suite of code enforcement work that's being done, and it's always those heavier duty, more serious things that keep our code enforcement folks busy.
And that's what the public, I think that is absolutely reflected in the attitude and awareness surveys, that people really care about the problematic behaviors that they're seeing that we have to address.
And as I've thought about both of these options, and they aren't, you know, they're expensive, but we could, you know, actually, at least in theory, do both of them. But if I had to pick one to have the biggest impact, in my mind, it's that security presence on the train. It's just somebody there whose people who are misbehaving are going to, you know, get off. And I think it gives customers that sense of there is somebody on this train somewhere, even if they're not in my car. I can get off at the next stop and get on over there, speak with them, that kind of thing. So I feel like there's almost a triage element, given where we are right now, to kind of just increase their sense of comfort, and for folks who are going to do, you know, things we don't want them to do on the system, for them to feel less comfortable on every train and consider getting off.
Thank you very much to all of you for your presentations. We've heard a lot of information today, and before we do final thoughts, there's an opportunity for that. I'd like to pass it to Sam, General Manager Dessou, for some next steps.
Thanks, President Gonzalez. First, wow, what a great, interesting discussion. I just want to show you here, I have 10 pages of your comments here. We got 2 staff members over there also taking all the comments that we're going to take back, and we're going to make sure that we sit down and have conversations. Your insights, your perspectives have been invaluable this morning to us here, you know, especially concerning the aspects that we've covered, the safety and security piece and the attitude and awareness piece that JC provided as well. All of this information intersects with the evolution of where we're going with our Vision 2030 plan. So that's front and center to me. But I want to just stop and pause here. If we just take a moment and just ask you how you feel. You know, how are you feeling right now about the full conversations, so that I could take a little bit more insight in from you, if you don't mind, President Gonzalez.
Glad to open it up to the rest of the board. I'll just simply begin by saying I feel like we're heading in the right direction, and we're looking at this with our eyes open. And I'm glad to see how the general region sees us in context with the other agencies. And I see us as a golden opportunity to really step forward as the conveners around regional safety and security, because it's top of mind for everyone. It's a golden moment for us. That's my thoughts. Yes,
Thank you.
Director Edwards. I just went like
Thank
this.
you. I think we're on the right track. I really appreciate even though we have diverse opinions about things, I think we're all going the same direction. And that doesn't mean that we can't get there. It just means that sometimes we have a different way or different thoughts about how to get there. And I think we're going to get there, and we'll get there soon.
Thank you, Director Kim.
And I feel that the stars are aligned. I mean, we're on the stage not because we wanted to, but I think the rest of the communities are looking at us because things have happened in certain ways, the external circumstances, and I feel eager to act. And I know that I try to always be careful about making actions, but I feel so very eager to act, to take that another half a step forward as an agency.
Thank you. And Director Frisbee, I see your hand up. I wanted to just ping it over to Director Lewis because I don't see her on the screen right now. If good time, Director Lewis, how are you feeling? How are you doing? What are your thoughts? There we go.
There I am. Well, I echo what everyone has said so far. And I think some lasting thoughts on myself was a comment Director Kellogg made is we have the similar security issues and thoughts as a public when we ride or get on transportation flying from one point to the other. Safety and security is everywhere, and it is a top concern. I think we're not in a bubble by ourselves. Other transit agencies, including Metro and our police department and our sheriff's department, have that same issue of safety and security. It will always be with us, but I think how we are approaching it today with all the variety of conversation, thoughts, I'd like to see us continue that. That is the only way we reach to the next step, and we not put it on the, side burner and kind of hope and pray that it will kind of work itself out. It will not work itself out. I think persistence of collaboration with other agencies, and if we are going to get into 2030 with a safer system, we need to continue the discussion and all of our thoughts, the board of directors' thoughts, management's, and I liked Director Edwards as also TriMet employees, and that they be part of the equation of looking at safety and security. We all ride TriMet in some form, and the safety and security is all of our problem, and it's all of our hope to move and make it a better system. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Lewis, Director Frisbee, and then Director Way.
I just thank you for the question. I love talking about feelings, but I think this discussion today illustrates the challenge and the nuances, and I really appreciate the thoughtfulness and values that all my colleagues are bringing to the table. I would love, I think today was an early discussion. I think as we move forward, it's also important to work with some of our community partners and our other government partners to get feedback, to refine things as we move forward. So that is something that I would love to see. And then I will just give my plug. You can take it or leave it. But this is clearly a critical part of our riders' experience and a critical need in order to address ridership. I also don't want to overlook the maintenance components of what we talked about today, because I think that is a really important part of this discussion. If we cannot maintain our system, A, we have huge safety problems. B, it actually has huge impacts for our riders who then end up getting stuck in maintenance problems. You want to have someone not ride TriMet again, have them spend an extra hour and a half on their max trip home. So I think that's an important part of this conversation. As we talk more about Vision 2030 and ridership in general, I I do think there are a lot of other components that are really important to talk about. From the gamut of routes, frequency, service. What are we building? What do people need? How are we paying for it? What are the other policies that our local partners are implementing that help support transit? So I look forward to equally robust conversations around those issues as we flesh out Vision 2030.
Excellent.
Thank you, Director Wade.
Thank you. I'll keep it short, but I do believe that safety and security is on top of mind for everybody. I know it is for me. It is for my family and the communities that I'm a part of. And I think one of the ways that we can continue to increase our safety and security presence is by increasing ridership. So absolutely what Director Frisbee was saying. We have to bring back our riders. We have to, again, make sure that fares are affordable, that they feel safe and secure on our system. But that is also, there's a psychological component of feeling safer in more volumes of people taking transit. There's an absolute correlation between seeing more people on our buses, seeing more people on our maxes as to ways that crimes decrease as a result of more volume. So we have to do that, I think, first and foremost, and then continue to create that safe environment. So thank you.
Thank you, directors. Did I miss someone? Thank you. Yes, Director Way, it was confusing if your hand is still. It's okay. Thank you very much. Before I close up the meeting, any final thoughts, General?
Just a couple of things. I do want to say that I want to reiterate what I've shared with you for the Vision 2030 strategy session. I do believe as well that we're taking the necessary steps to put us on a positive path as we set the agency up for success. I know you've talked about questions of what success looked like, and I think we're on the right path here. So more work to come. Want to thank JC and his team, PRR, our Chief Operating Officer, our Chief Safety Officer, and also our interim maintenance executive as well. Just want to let you know that the survey reports, we're going to continue to use them as a touch point for our future endeavors. We're going to have more surveying, which I've heard from around the table. One, I want to be able to move us forward to enhance our efforts to make TriMet just not a choice, but a natural choice for everyone in this region here. So I want to give you a couple points that I've put together about what's ahead for us, what's coming. In the next couple of weeks, we are going to sit down and I will be synthesizing all of the information that you've provided today, really taking it in, having discussions, and then we're going to come back and we will propose our next steps in a very actionable plan as we move forward. Want to really thank you for your dedication and the passion that I've seen today. You've really touched me and inspired me from both the board and also our staff. And as been stated here, I'm very much in agreement and feel very confident that with our collective efforts that we're bringing together, we're going to navigate the challenges ahead, and we're going to really make TriMet a beacon of safety, accessibility, and innovation here. So thank you for your contributions during this retreat, and I'm really excited about sharing information as we move forward in our upcoming board meetings and really sharing progress with you as we shape our future and also shape this region as we move forward. I would be remiss if I didn't say this. As the holiday season is up on us right now, we are 15 days away from Thanksgiving. And this is that time we enter the time of the year where we really encourage ourselves, each one of us, to really stop and consider all we have to be grateful for in our lives. And doing this is good for all of us here. So I know we're going to be gathering with our families and friends and, having that feeling of gratitude. But I want to just take a moment to acknowledge you as a board and give each one of you thanks, letting you know how you have guided and inspired and supported me, TriMet, this organization, our employees in this region. And I just wanted to let you know that I'm very grateful for all of you. And 'tis the season giving thanks. I want to just say happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, General Manager Dessou. And so with that, I'll close up with a couple of final thoughts here. First of all, an extension of gratitude to Sam, to the team of TriMet that has brought forward the presentations today, to PRR for assisting with the A&A survey and presenting that to us as well. Of course, to my fellow board members for sharing their thoughts, bringing forward their perspectives. I certainly hope that much of what you've heard today as an agency helps clear some things for you and helps you come forward with some ideas in more confidence that you understand where we're coming from and what we'd like to see you address in those proposals. I'm really grateful, frankly, to be able to work alongside such engaging, such interested, such curious board members. It's very gratifying to see that we're all, though we don't all come from the same place, we don't agree on all things all the time. We have a fundamental agreement that what we want is TriMet to be operating in its most excellent version of itself, and that the public will be best served if we can accomplish that. And so it's great to see us lean into that and figure out how we arrive there. You could see you have an engaged board that is very useful in the rollout of this. We have community relationships, we have agency relationships, and we want you to not just ask us questions and get our perspective, but to really lean into how we can help further and advance the excellence of the agency. So it's my hope that as you move forward, we're able to carry this momentum into some actionable steps, that we get to see some meaningful progress, that our riders get to feel the effects of what we're discussing today. And so with that, I also say happy Thanksgiving. I wish you all the best with whether you stay here in the region or whether you go to visit loved ones elsewhere. May you have a wonderful, safe trip. And I wish each and every one of you safe travels, and I look forward to our next meeting. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close our board retreat. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Certainly.